Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into something absolutely insane. What if Deku had molecular reconstruction instead of one for all? Now hold up before you think, oh, that sounds weak. Let me blow your mind with why this quirk is absolutely broken. We're talking about the ability to manipulate matter at the molecular level. This means Deku could literally turn air into weapons, reconstruct damaged buildings instantly, and get this, even heal people by rebuilding their damaged organs. Imagine fighting a villain and suddenly the ground beneath them turns into quicksand, or creating diamond-hard armor from literal trash. This isn't just versatile, it's reality-warping levels of overpowered. So we thought, what if we took this concept and made Deku into a literal scientific genius who approaches heroism like a walking chemistry lab? Our story follows Izuku as he goes from being dismissed as support class to revolutionizing hero society itself, healing All Might's injuries, and ultimately facing down All for One with abilities that operate on quantum levels of power. This journey culminates in him creating a network that lets heroes share their quirks cooperatively, basically turning the entire concept of individual power on its head. If this sounds as epic as I think it does, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring that notification bell because we're about to dive into some next level storytelling. Alright, let's dive into this masterpiece. 4 years old. The toy robot lay in pieces across the playground concrete, its red paint chipped and plastic limbs scattered like fallen leaves. Izuku Midoriya knelt beside the broken fragments, tears threatening to spill from his wide green eyes. I'm sorry, he whispered to the older boy towering over him. I didn't mean to bump into you. Stupid Deku, Bakugo snarled, his small fists still smoking from the explosion that had sent the robot flying. Look what you made me do, that was my favorite. Izuku's fingers trembled as he reached for the largest piece, the robot's torso. The moment his skin made contact with the plastic, something strange happened. A warm, tingling sensation spread through his fingertips, and he could feel the molecular structure of the toy, like invisible threads connecting every broken fragment. I can fix this, a voice in his mind whispered. I can make it whole again. Without understanding how or why, Izuku began to concentrate. The plastic grew warm under his touch, and slowly, impossibly, the cracks began to seal. The scattered pieces trembled, then slid across the concrete toward his hands as if drawn by magnets. Within moments, the robot sat whole in his palms, looking exactly as it had before Bakugo's explosion. How did you? Bakugo stumbled backward, his red eyes wide with shock. I don't know, Izuku breathed, staring at the reconstructed toy in wonder. Present day, age 14. Midoriya, could you please pay attention to the lesson instead of rearranging your pencil at the molecular level? Izuku's head snapped up from his desk, where he'd been absent-mindedly shifting the graphite in his pencil from one configuration to another, a nervous habit he'd developed over the years. The carbon atoms responded to his touch like old friends, eager to dance into new patterns. Sorry, sensei, he mumbled, releasing his grip on the pencil. Around him, his middle school classmates snickered. Freak, someone whispered. What kind of hero quirk is that? Another student muttered. He's basically a walking chemistry set. Izuku hunched lower in his seat. They weren't wrong, exactly. When his quirk had been officially registered as molecular reconstruction, the doctor had been dismissive. Minor matter manipulation, the man had said, barely looking up from his clipboard. Useful for support work, perhaps, material science applications. But hero work, the boy would need extensive scientific knowledge to make this quirk combat viable, and even then. The doctor had trailed off with a shrug that said everything, not hero material. But Izuku had never stopped believing. Every night for the past 10 years, he'd studied chemistry textbooks, physics principles, molecular theory, anything that could help him understand and expand his quirk's potential. What others saw as a support class ability, he knew could be so much more. Now then, the teacher continued, as we discussed yesterday, most of you will be applying to hero schools after graduation. Though I should remind you that UA only accepts the most exceptional candidates. Don't lump me in with these extras, Bakugo's voice exploded across the classroom as he leaped onto his desk. I'm the only one here getting into UA, my quirk is perfect for hero work, unlike some people who can barely handle a broken toy. His crimson glare fixed on Izuku, who felt his stomach clench. Even after 10 years, Bakugo had never quite gotten over the shock of Izuku's quirk manifestation. What had started as childhood confusion had curdled into resentment, especially as Izuku's abilities had grown more sophisticated with study and practice. Actually, Izuku said quietly, his voice barely audible over the classroom chatter, I'm applying to UA too. The room fell silent. Bakugo's explosion quirk crackled around his palms. What did you just say, Deku? Izuku stood slowly, his hands steady despite the nervous energy coursing through him. Over the years, he'd learned to find confidence in preparation, in understanding. He might not have Bakugo's raw power or flashy displays, but he had something else. I said I'm applying to UA, Izuku repeated, louder this time. My quirk might not look impressive, but what? Bakugo snarled. You gonna rebuild the villains to death, fix their broken bones so they can hit you harder? Several students laughed, but Izuku pressed on. My quirk lets me understand and manipulate matter at the molecular level. With the right knowledge and application, I can. Can what nerds turn air into a teddy bear? Izuku's eyes flashed. Without breaking eye contact with Bakugo, he reached out and touched the metal leg of the nearest desk. The students around him gasped as the steel began to flow like liquid under his fingers, reshaping itself into a perfect replica of a kunai knife before solidifying again. I can turn air into a weapon, Izuku said quietly, his voice carrying a confidence that made several classmates lean back. I can reconstruct broken infrastructure during disasters. I can neutralize bombs by altering their chemical composition. I can. Enough, the teacher slammed his hand on the desk. Midoriya, no quirk usage in class, and put that desk back the way it was. Yes, sensei, Izuku touched the metal kunai and it flowed back into its original desk-leg shape, but the demonstration had served its purpose. He could see it in his classmates' faces, surprise, curiosity, and in Bakugo's case, something that looked uncomfortably like worry. As the class resumed, Izuku pulled out his worn notebook labeled Hero Analysis for the Future 13 and began sketching molecular diagrams in the margins. He'd filled 12 previous notebooks with quirk analysis, combat applications, and theoretical frameworks for using molecular reconstruction in heroic scenarios. Atmospheric arsenal, he wrote beneath a diagram showing the reconstruction of nitrogen and oxygen into solid projectiles. Energy cost, high for complex structures, but simple weapons should be sustainable in combat scenarios. He'd been working on this technique for months, practicing in secret at the beach where no one could see him. The theory was sound, air was full of molecules just waiting to be rearranged, but the execution required intense concentration and a deep understanding of chemical bonds. If I can master this before the entrance exam. Oi Deku. Izuku looked up to find Bakugo standing beside his desk, the classroom now empty except for them, when had class ended. You think you're so smart with your science nerd quirk, Bakugo growled, leaning close enough that Izuku could smell the faint scent of nitroglycerin that always surrounded him. But raw power beats fancy tricks every time. Don't embarrass yourself at UA. Kaken I. We're not kids anymore, Bakugo's voice was low, dangerous. That broken toy trick won't save you when real villains come calling. He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. And stop calling me Kaken, we're not friends. Alone in the empty classroom, Izuku stared down at his notebook. Bakugo was wrong about one thing, it hadn't been a trick 10 years ago. He'd felt something break inside himself when he'd seen that destroyed toy, something that demanded he make it whole again. That same feeling had driven him to study, to practice, to push his quirk beyond what anyone thought possible. Molecular reconstruction, the ability to rearrange matter at the atomic level. Applications, construction, destruction, healing, weapon creation, environmental manipulation. Limitations, requires physical contact initially. Energy drain proportional to complexity and scale of reconstruction. Must understand molecular structure to manipulate effectively. Current techniques, elemental shift, changing states of matter, molecular forge, creating simple tools, weapons, resonance, touch, energy-efficient manipulation using natural frequencies. Goals, develop ranged applications, master atmospheric reconstruction, learn biological reconstruction for medical applications. He flipped to a new page and wrote in careful letters, Plus Ultra, going beyond my limits. Tomorrow, he'd submit his UA application. They could call his quirk support class all they wanted, but Izuku knew the truth. With enough knowledge, enough dedication, enough understanding, molecular reconstruction could reshape the very definition of what it meant to be a hero. After all, the world itself was just molecules waiting to be rearranged by someone with the vision to see their potential. And Izuku Midoriya had been seeing that potential for 10 years. As he packed up his notebooks, his fingers unconsciously traced the surface of his desk one final time, feeling the dance of iron atoms beneath his touch. Tomorrow, his real journey would begin. I'll show them all, he thought. I'll show them that intelligence and understanding can be just as heroic as raw power. I'll show them that even molecules can become symbols of hope. The abandoned beach stretched endlessly before Izuku, its shoreline buried beneath mountains of rusted appliances, broken furniture, and forgotten debris. Dagaba Municipal Beach had once been beautiful, but decades of illegal dumping had transformed it into a metallic graveyard. For most people, it was an eyesore. For Izuku, it was the perfect training ground. 3 months until the UA entrance exam. All right, he murmured to himself, pulling out a worn notebook filled with molecular diagrams and training schedules. Let's start with basic material conversion. He approached a rusted refrigerator, its white paint peeling like dead skin. The moment his fingers made contact with the metal surface, he felt the familiar tingle of his quirk activating. Iron oxide rust flooded his senses like a three-dimensional map. Underneath, he could feel the pure iron still trapped within the oxidized shell. Breathe, focus, understand the structure. The rust began to flake away as Izuku convinced the oxygen atoms to release their grip on the iron. Within minutes, the refrigerator's surface gleamed silver bright, restored to its original metallic state. But Izuku wasn't finished. He pressed his palms flat against the appliance and pushed with his quirk. The metal groaned and shifted, flowing like liquid as he guided its molecular structure into a new configuration. The refrigerator stretched and twisted, its bulk condensing into the shape of a long, straight blade. Molecular forge, iron sword, he panted, stepping back to admire his work. The weapon was crude but functional, a 6-foot length of solid iron with a basic handle and guard. He'd been practicing this technique for weeks, learning to forge simple weapons from the available materials around him. The energy drain was significant but manageable for basic reconstructions. Now for the real test. Izuku hefted the sword and approached a pile of broken concrete blocks. With careful precision, he brought the blade down in a series of strikes, watching as it cut through the debris with ease. The iron held its edge, the molecular bonds tight and uniform thanks to his reconstruction. Not bad, he muttered, then paused as he heard footsteps behind him. Holy crap, Deku, what the hell is that? Izuku spun around to find Bakugo standing at the beach's entrance, his red eyes wide with shock as he stared at the iron sword. Kaken, what are you doing here? I followed you, obviously. Bakugo stalked closer, his gaze never leaving the weapon. I wanted to see what kind of pathetic training you've been doing, but this... He gestured at the sword, then at the restored refrigerator behind Izuku. How long have you been able to do this? I've been practicing, Izuku said carefully. My quirk is more versatile than people think. Versatile? Bakugo's voice cracked slightly. Deku, you just turned a refrigerator into a sword. That's not versatile, that's... He struggled for words. That's actually useful. The admission seemed to physically pain him. Izuku could see the conflict playing out across Bakugo's features, surprise, anger, and underneath it all, something that looked like fear. It's still just molecular reconstruction, Izuku said quietly. I can't create matter from nothing, only rearrange what's already there, and it takes a lot of energy for complex changes. Show me. What? Show me what else you can do. Bakugo's hands crackled with small explosions. All these years, you've been acting like your quirk was worthless, but you've been hiding this the whole time. I wasn't hiding anything, Izuku protested. No one ever asked to see what I could really do. That was true, but not the whole truth. He'd been practicing in secret partly because he'd wanted to surprise everyone at UA, but mostly because he'd been afraid. Afraid that even his improved techniques wouldn't be enough, afraid that he'd still be seen as just support class. Well, I'm asking now. Bakugo crossed his arms, his expression challenging. Come on, nerd, show me this molecular reconstruction in action. Izuku hesitated, then nodded. He'd kept his abilities hidden for too long. Maybe it was time to show someone, even Bakugo, what he could really do. He approached a pile of plastic bottles and aluminum cans, touching each one briefly to understand their molecular composition. Then, with careful concentration, he began to reshape them. The plastic flowed like clay under his fingers while the aluminum shifted and merged. Within minutes, he'd created a complex mechanical device, a crossbow-like launcher with plastic components and aluminum reinforcement. "Molecular forge composite crossbow," he announced, lifting the finished weapon. Bakugo's jaw dropped. "You made that from trash?" "Mostly." Izuku tested the crossbow's mechanism, pleased to find it functioned perfectly. "The molecules don't care what shape they were in before. With enough understanding of materials science, I can turn almost any combination of elements into useful tools." To demonstrate, he gathered a handful of debris, more plastic, some copper wire, fragments of glass. His quirk hummed as he worked, transforming the random materials into perfectly crafted crossbow bolts with weighted tips and aerodynamic fletching. "This is insane," Bakugo muttered, watching Izuku load and test fire the weapon. The bolt sailed nearly 100 meters before embedding itself in a distant pile of scrap metal. "How long have you been working on this?" "About 2 years for the basic techniques, 6 months for the more complex stuff." Izuku set the crossbow aside and approached another pile of debris. "But this is just the beginning. Watch this." He placed his hands on a collection of broken electronics, old phones, a shattered tablet, various metal components. This time, instead of reshaping everything into a single item, he began separating and purifying the materials. The plastic components flowed away from the metal ones, while the metals themselves separated by type, aluminum here, copper there, traces of gold and silver forming tiny gleaming pools. "Elemental shift, material purification," he explained as he worked. "I can break down complex objects into their component elements, then use those pure materials for more precise reconstructions." Bakugo's voice was barely a whisper. "Deku, do you realize what you're doing? You're basically a walking recycling plant. You could clean up this entire beach." "Actually, that's not a bad idea." Izuku looked around at the mountains of trash with new interest. "The exercise would be good practice, and I could create a lot of useful materials in the process." "That's not the point," Bakugo exploded, literally small bursts of nitroglycerin popping around his palms. "The point is that your quirk is actually powerful. All these years I thought, everyone said." He trailed off, his expression conflicted. Izuku could see the internal struggle playing out, years of believing himself superior, suddenly confronted with evidence that the quirkless kid he'd bullied might actually be more capable than anyone had realized. "Kaken," Izuku said softly, "my quirk was never weak, I just needed to understand it better." "Don't," Bakugo's voice was sharp, "don't act like this changes anything between us. So what if you can make fancy weapons? Raw power still beats clever tricks." To prove his point, he launched himself at one of Izuku's discarded iron constructs, his explosion-propelled fist reducing it to twisted scrap in seconds. "See?" Bakugo panted, smoke rising from his palms. "All your molecular whatever doesn't matter if you can't react fast enough to use it." Izuku nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. My reconstructions are only as good as my ability to deploy them in combat. That's why I need to work on speed and efficiency." He touched the pile of scrap that had once been his sword, his quirk analyzing the damage. With quick, practiced movements, he began rebuilding it. But this time, instead of a simple blade, he created something more complex. The iron flowed into the shape of a staff with retractable sections, capable of extending into a spear or collapsing into a compact baton. "Molecular forge adaptive staff," he announced, demonstrating the weapon's versatility. Variable length, balanced for both offensive and defensive use. Bakugo stared at the rebuilt weapon, his expression unreadable. "How fast can you make these things?" "Depends on complexity. Simple weapons like knives or clubs, maybe 30 seconds with physical contact. More complex items like this staff, 2 to 3 minutes, but I'm getting faster with practice." 30 seconds is still too slow for real combat. "I know." Izuku collapsed the staff and clipped it to his belt. "That's why I'm developing something I call resonance touch. Every type of molecule has natural vibration frequencies. If I can learn to match those frequencies, I can manipulate materials with much less energy, which means faster reconstructions." He demonstrated by touching a piece of copper wire. Instead of the usual flowing reconstruction, the metal seemed to sing under his touch, reshaping itself almost instantly into a perfect spiral. "Resonance touch copper coil," he said. "When I match the molecular frequency, the energy requirement drops by about 60%. Bakugo was quiet for a long moment, staring at the coil in Izuku's hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was strangely subdued. "You've really thought this through, haven't you? The science, the applications, the training." He looked around at the beach, taking in the evidence of Izuku's dedication, the purified materials, the practice weapons, the carefully organized piles of different elements. "I've had to," Izuku replied. "Everyone always said my quirk wasn't suited for hero work. If I wanted to prove them wrong, I needed to understand it better than anyone else understands theirs." "And you really think this is enough to get in?" Izuku pulled out his training notebook, flipping to a page covered with combat scenarios and theoretical applications. "The entrance exam tests combat ability against robots, right? My quirk should be perfect for that. I can create weapons, disable machinery by altering their components, even use the environment itself as a tool." He pointed to a detailed diagram showing atmospheric molecular reconstruction. "I've been working on this technique, turning air molecules into solid projectiles. It's energy intensive, but if I can master it, I'll have unlimited ammunition in any fight." "You want to turn air into weapons?" Bakugo's eyes widened. "That's actually kind of terrifying." "Only if it works." Izuku closed the notebook and tucked it away. "I haven't managed more than small, simple shapes so far. The molecular bonds in atmospheric gases are tricky to manipulate." "Show me." Izuku hesitated. His atmospheric reconstruction attempts had been mostly failures, producing weak, unstable constructs that dissolved within seconds. But Bakugo's presence seemed to demand a demonstration. He extended his hand toward empty air, concentrating intensely on the nitrogen and oxygen molecules around his fingers. "Come together, form bonds, become solid." For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, a small crystalline structure began to form in his palm, a translucent dagger made from compressed and reconstructed atmospheric gases. "Atmospheric arsenal, air blade," he whispered, holding up the fragile weapon. The dagger lasted exactly 3 seconds before dissolving back into its component gases. "Needs work," Bakugo commented dryly. "A lot of work," Izuku agreed, "but the principle is sound. With enough practice and energy control, I should be able to create stable atmospheric constructs. Imagine having unlimited access to building materials in any environment." Bakugo was quiet again, his red eyes fixed on the spot where the air dagger had briefly existed. When he looked up, his expression was complicated, part respect, part frustration, part something that might have been fear. "Deku," he said finally, "promise me something." "What?" "When we both get into UA, and we will both get in, promise me you won't go easy on me because we used to be friends." "Kakin." "Promise me?" Bakugo's voice cracked slightly. "I've spent years thinking I was better than you, stronger than you. If that turns out to be wrong, if your science nerd quirk really is more powerful than mine, then I want to face it head on. No holding back, no pity, no childhood friend bullshit." Izuku studied his former friend's face, seeing determination and vulnerability warring in his expression. This was Bakugo's way of acknowledging that the dynamic between them had shifted, that the powerless kid he'd known was becoming something formidable. "I promise," Izuku said quietly, "no holding back." Bakugo nodded curtly, then turned to leave. He made it halfway up the beach before stopping and calling back over his shoulder. "Oh, and Deku, that beach cleanup idea, actually not terrible. This place is an eyesore." With that, he stalked away, leaving Izuku alone with his thoughts and his growing arsenal of molecular constructs. 3 months until UA, Izuku thought, looking around at the trash-strewn beach with new eyes. 3 months to master atmospheric reconstruction, perfect my combat applications, and prove that molecular heroes belong in the spotlight. He picked up his adaptive staff and began walking toward the next pile of debris. There was work to do. The morning of UA's entrance exam dawned crisp and clear, with a hint of spring in the air that made the cherry blossoms dance outside the testing facility. Izuku stood among the crowd of hopeful students, his backpack containing 3 notebooks filled with molecular diagrams, a compact first aid kit, and a small collection of pure metals he'd refined during his beach training. 2 weeks since Kakin saw my training, 2 weeks of pushing myself harder than ever. His fingers unconsciously traced the outline of the pencil in his pocket, not for writing, but for the pure graphite he could reconstruct into diamond-hard projectiles if needed. Old habits. "Welcome, examinees," President Mike's voice boomed across the auditorium, making several students jump. "Are you ready to learn about the practical exam that will determine your fate?" As the voice hero explained the rules, destroy robots worth different point values within the time limit, Izuku felt his confidence building. This was exactly what he'd been preparing for. Robots were just complex arrangements of metal, plastic, and electronics. To his quirk, they were raw materials waiting to be rearranged. "The fourth robot type is worth 0 points, President Mike continued. "It's just an obstacle, avoid it." Or, Izuku thought, use it as the largest source of raw materials in the exam. "Excuse me," a tall boy with blue hair and rectangular glasses stood up, his hand raised. "You said there were 4 types of robots, but your diagram only shows 3, if this is an error in official UA materials." "That's the 0-pointer I just mentioned," President Mike laughed. "Pay attention." The blue-haired boy's sharp gaze swept the auditorium before settling on Izuku. "You there, with the green hair, you've been muttering this entire time. Such behavior is disrespectful to your fellow examinees and—" "Sorry," Izuku said quietly, not wanting to draw more attention. But he could feel hundreds of eyes on him now, including a familiar red glare from across the room. "Kakin's here, of course he is." 30 minutes later, Izuku found himself standing before the gates of Testing Ground Beta, surrounded by other nervous examinees. The urban environment beyond the gates was perfect for his quirk, plenty of concrete, metal, and debris to work with. "Begin," President Mike's voice echoed from the speakers. The gates swung open and chaos erupted. Most of the examinees rushed forward immediately, quirks blazing as they sought out robot targets. Izuku held back for a crucial moment, his analytical mind cataloging the environment. Concrete buildings provided calcium carbonate and silicon compounds. Street lamps offered steel and aluminum. Even the asphalt contained useful hydrocarbons. "Everything I need for a complete arsenal." He spotted his first target, a 3-pointer robot rolling toward a cluster of students. Instead of charging directly at it, Izuku pressed his palm against the nearest concrete wall. "Molecular Forge Calcium Carbide Lance." The concrete flowed like water under his touch, calcium and carbon separating and recombining into a long, spear-like weapon with a diamond-hard tip. The entire process took less than 20 seconds. Weeks of practice had paid off. Izuku hefted the lance and sprinted toward the robot. Its sensors locked onto him, mechanical arms extending with spinning saw blades, but his weapon had superior reach. The calcium carbide tip punched through the robot's armor plating like paper, striking the central processor and dropping it instantly. 3 points, good start. Around him, other examinees were struggling with direct confrontations. A boy with a tail was wrestling with a 2-pointer. A girl who could turn invisible was trying to sneak around a 1-pointer's sensors. They're thinking like fighters, Izuku realized, but this isn't about fighting, it's about efficiency. He approached a street lamp and placed both hands on its base. Elemental shift, metal separation. The lamp post contained a mixture of steel, aluminum, and trace elements. Izuku's quirk sorted them with practiced ease, creating 3 pools of pure metal at his feet. From the steel, he forged a series of throwing knives. The aluminum became lightweight projectile tips. The trace elements, copper, zinc, tin, formed into ball bearings perfect for kinetic weapons. A 4-pointer rounded the corner, its larger frame bristling with defensive systems. Other students scattered, but Izuku stood his ground. Molecular Forge Steel Rain. He hurled his throwing knives in rapid succession, each one targeting a different joint or sensor cluster on the robot. The blades struck true, severing hydraulic lines and damaging optical systems. The robot stumbled, its coordination disrupted. But Izuku wasn't finished. He grabbed a handful of his copper ball bearings and approached the wounded machine. At close range, he pressed his palm against its armor and activated his quirk. Elemental Shift, Molecular Dissolution. The robot's steel plating began to flow and separate, its carefully engineered structure coming apart at the molecular level. Within seconds, the four-pointer collapsed into a pile of neatly sorted component materials. 7 points total, but more importantly, he now had access to the robot's advanced alloys and electronic components, materials that would make his next constructs even more effective. Holy crap, a nearby student gasped. Did he just melt that thing? Word began to spread through the testing ground. The green-haired kid with the analysis quirk was dismantling robots like a one-man recycling plant. Some students tried to copy his approach, but none had his deep understanding of materials science or his practiced efficiency. Izuku was in his element. Each defeated robot provided materials for better weapons. Each weapon allowed him to take down stronger opponents. It was a feedback loop of molecular reconstruction that quickly put him far ahead of other examinees. By the 15-minute mark, he'd accumulated 23 points and a small arsenal of advanced constructs. Titanium blades from robot armor, precision tools made from electronic components, and even a crude but functional magnetic launcher built from copper coils and rare earth elements. Time for the real test. He'd been avoiding the zero-pointer deliberately, waiting for the right moment. The massive robot was 3 stories tall, a walking fortress of steel and armor that sent other examinees fleeing in panic. But to Izuku, it wasn't a threat. It was the largest collection of raw materials in the entire testing ground. The zero-pointer was currently pursuing a brown-haired girl whose gravity quirk had malfunctioned, leaving her trapped under a pile of debris. Other students were running away, but Izuku found himself moving toward the danger. What would a real hero do? The answer was obvious. Atmospheric arsenal, emergency procedure. Izuku extended both hands toward the air in front of him, drawing on every lesson he'd learned about atmospheric reconstruction. This time, instead of trying to create weapons, he focused on something simpler but larger, a massive cushion of compressed nitrogen and oxygen to shield the trapped girl. The air shimmered and solidified into a translucent barrier just as the zero-pointer's massive foot came down. The atmospheric construct held for exactly 2 seconds, long enough for Izuku to reach the girl and activate his emergency plan. He pressed both palms against the zero-pointer's leg armor, ignoring the tremendous vibrations that threatened to break his concentration. Genesis Protocol, Structural Analysis. This was the most advanced technique he'd ever attempted. Instead of simply rearranging the robot's materials, he was mapping its entire molecular structure in real time, looking for critical failure points. They're the primary support struts. They're made of carbon steel, but there are stress concentrations at the joints. Genesis Protocol, Targeted Dissolution. Izuku focused his quirk on those specific stress points, causing the molecular bonds to weaken at precisely the right locations. The zero-pointer's leg buckled, then collapsed as the support structure failed in a cascade of carefully orchestrated breakdowns. The massive robot toppled backward, crashing into an empty building in a cloud of dust and debris. But it was still functional, its upper body weapons turning toward Izuku and the trapped girl. One more technique, the most dangerous one. Izuku looked up at the robot's chest, where he could sense the high-energy power core that kept it running. Lithium-ion batteries, supercapacitors, maybe even some experimental energy storage systems. If I can reach the power core. Atmospheric arsenal, nitrogen platform. He created a series of stepping stones from compressed atmospheric gases, each one lasting just long enough for him to leap to the next. It was like climbing a staircase made of solidified air, his quirk working at maximum efficiency to maintain the temporary constructs. The robot's sensors tracked his movement, weapons swiveling to target him, but Izuku was already committed to his plan. He reached the chest plate and slammed both palms against the metal armor. Genesis Protocol, Power Core Reconstruction. This time, instead of destroying the robot's systems, he began rearranging them. The high-energy batteries became inert carbon and lithium compounds. The supercapacitors discharged safely into simplified resistor networks. Even the experimental components were broken down into their harmless constituent elements. The zero-pointer's lights went out one by one as its power systems safely shut down. Within 30 seconds, the massive robot was nothing more than an elaborate sculpture of inert materials. Times UP, Present Mike's voice boomed across the testing ground. Izuku dropped to his knees, exhausted. The Genesis Protocol techniques had drained nearly all his energy, but he'd accomplished something unprecedented, not just defeating the zero-pointer, but doing it without causing any collateral damage to the surrounding area. "Are you okay?" The brown-haired girl he'd saved was limping toward him, concern evident in her large brown eyes. "I'm fine," Izuku panted, "just tired. Are you hurt?" "Nothing serious thanks to you," she smiled brightly. "I'm Ochako Uraraka. That was amazing. I've never seen a quirk like yours before." "Izuku Midoriya, and it's just molecular reconstruction. Not very flashy." "Not flashy?" Uraraka's eyes widened. "You just took down the zero-pointer and saved me, and you made stepping stones out of air." Before Izuku could respond, a small, elderly woman appeared beside them. Recovery Girl, UA's famous healing hero, was checking Uraraka for injuries with practiced efficiency. "You did well, young man," she said to Izuku without looking up. "That was some impressive quirk usage. Though you pushed yourself quite hard, your energy levels are dangerously low." "I'll be fine," Izuku insisted. "I just need to rest and eat something." Recovery Girl's sharp eyes studied him carefully. "Molecular reconstruction, you said. That's a rare quirk type, very scientifically demanding." "Yes, ma'am. I've been studying chemistry and physics to understand it better." "Smart boy. Most students with matter manipulation quirks never bother to learn the underlying science. They plateau early because they don't understand what they're actually doing." She handed him a piece of candy. "Eat this. The sugar will help with the energy depletion." As Recovery Girl moved on to treat other injured examinees, Izuku found himself surrounded by curious students asking about his quirk and techniques. But his attention was drawn to a familiar explosive sound nearby. Bakugo was standing over the remains of 3 robots, his palms still smoking from recent explosions. When their eyes met across the testing ground, Bakugo's expression was unreadable. He saw everything, Izuku realized. The atmospheric arsenal, the Genesis Protocol, the zero-pointer takedown. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Bakugo turned away without a word, stalking toward the exit. "That's Bakugo Katsuki," Uraraka said, following Izuku's gaze. "I heard he got the highest combat score in the exam. His explosion quirk is incredible." "Yeah," Izuku said quietly, "he's amazing." "But so am I," he thought, "and maybe that's what scares both of us." 1 week later. The acceptance letter arrived on a day when spring rain drummed against Izuku's bedroom window. His mother hovered anxiously in the doorway as he opened the envelope with trembling fingers. A small disc fell out, projecting a hologram of All Might himself. "Young Midoriya," the symbol of peace boomed, his trademark smile brilliant even in holographic form. "Congratulations, you have passed the entrance exam." Izuku's mother gasped, tears already starting to flow. "But that's not all," All Might continued. "You also earned something special during the practical exam. When you saved young Uraraka from the zero-pointer, several examinees witnessed your heroic action. This exam wasn't just about defeating robots, it was about measuring your hero spirit." The hologram shifted to show Izuku's final scores. Combat points 47, highest in your testing group. Rescue points 45, awarded for saving Uraraka and demonstrating true heroic qualities. Total 92 points. Young Midoriya, All Might's voice grew more serious. "Your quirk and your character both show tremendous promise. I look forward to seeing what kind of hero you become. Welcome to UA High School." The hologram faded, leaving Izuku staring at the acceptance packet in stunned silence. "I did it," he whispered. "I actually did it." His mother's proud sobs filled the room as she wrapped him in a tight hug. "I always knew you would, Izuku. I always knew." That night, as Izuku lay in bed planning his first day at UA, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. From the broken toy on the playground to the zero-pointer in the testing ground, his quirk had grown from a curiosity into something truly heroic. Plus ultra, he thought, remembering the motto he'd written in his notebook, "Going beyond my limits." He'd proven that intelligence and understanding could be just as powerful as raw strength. He'd shown that molecular reconstruction belonged in the hero course, not support class. But most importantly, he'd learned what it really meant to be a hero, not just having the power to defeat villains, but having the heart to save people. Tomorrow, his real journey would begin. The entrance to Class 1A felt like stepping into a cathedral of heroes. Izuku paused in the doorway, taking in the oversized desks, the wall of windows letting in morning sunlight, and most importantly, the faces of his new classmates. These were the students who had passed UA's infamous entrance exam alongside him, future heroes, each with their own incredible quirks. "I belong here," he reminded himself, gripping the strap of his bag. Inside were his latest notebooks, now expanded to include detailed analyses of quirks he'd observed during the entrance exam. "Deku." The familiar voice made his stomach clench. Bakugo was already seated near the back, his red eyes tracking Izuku's movement with an unreadable expression. They hadn't spoken since the entrance exam, but Izuku could feel the weight of unfinished conversation between them. "Oh, it's you," a cheerful voice called out. Uraraka was waving at him from a desk near the middle of the room, her smile as bright as he remembered. "I'm so glad we're in the same class." "Uraraka-san," Izuku said, making his way over to her. "I'm happy to see you too. You must be the young man who destroyed that robot at the entrance exam." The blue-haired boy from the auditorium stood up, bowing formally. "I am Tenya Iida from Sumi Private Academy. I must apologize for my behavior during the presentation. Your muttering was clearly strategic analysis, not disrespect." "Oh, thank you," Izuku replied, still adjusting to being acknowledged rather than dismissed. "I'm Izuku Midoriya." "The molecular reconstruction user," said a calm voice from nearby. A boy with heterochromatic hair, half white, half red, was watching them with mismatched eyes. "Your quirk application was impressive." Todoroki, Izuku thought, recognizing him from the entrance exam footage he'd analyzed. Fire and ice. Incredible raw power, but he seemed to only use the ice side during the exam. "If you're here to make friends, you can pack up now." The gruff voice silenced the classroom chatter. A man in a yellow sleeping bag was somehow standing in the doorway, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "It took 8 seconds for you to quiet down. Time is limited. You kids are not rational enough." The man's tired eyes surveyed the room. "I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Put these on and head outside." He held up a blue and white tracksuit. "We're doing a quirk assessment test." A quirk assessment test on the first day, Izuku thought as they changed into their gym clothes. This is already different from regular schools. Minutes later, they were standing on UA's training field, a massive complex that looked more like a professional sports facility than a school gym. Aizawa stood before them, still looking like he'd rather be sleeping. "You kids have been doing these same basic fitness tests since middle school," he said, holding up a device that looked like a smartphone. "Softball throw, standing long jump, 50-meter dash, but you've never been allowed to use your quirks. Today, that changes." He gestured to Bakugo. "You finished first in the entrance exam, right? How far could you throw a softball in middle school?" 67 meters, Bakugo replied without hesitation. "Try it with your quirk this time. Stay in the circle." Bakugo stepped into the throwing circle, a predatory grin spreading across his face. He wound up like a pitcher, then unleashed his explosion quirk at the moment of release. The softball disappeared into the distance with a thunderous boom. 705.2 meters, Aizawa announced, showing them the device's display. The class erupted in excited chatter. "This looks fun. We can use our quirks as much as we want. This is what being a hero is about." Aizawa's expression darkened. "Fun? You think this is fun?" His hair began to float and his eyes glowed red. "You have 3 years to become a hero. Do you think it's all going to be games and fun times?" The oppressive weight of his presence made several students step back. "Idiots, today you'll compete in 8 different trials. Whoever comes in last place will be expelled immediately." Expelled on the first day, Izuku felt his palms grow sweaty. He'd worked so hard to get here, studied and trained for months. The thought of losing it all because of poor physical performance. "That's not fair," Uraraka protested. "Natural disasters, highway accidents, rampaging villains, calamity is always right around the corner," Aizawa replied coldly. "Japan is full of unfair things. Heroes are the ones who reverse those situations. If you were hoping to spend your evenings hanging out at McDonald's, I'm sorry to tell you. For the next 3 years, UA will run you through the ringer." He smiled, and it wasn't reassuring. "Use whatever methods you can think of, just don't hold back." Methods I can think of, Izuku repeated to himself as they moved to the first station. He's not just testing our quirks, he's testing our creativity, our ability to think strategically under pressure. The 50-meter dash came first. Students with movement-based quirks like Iida's engines or Ajiro's tail had obvious advantages, but Izuku had been thinking about this scenario for weeks. When his turn came, he knelt down and pressed both palms against the track surface. Resonance touch, concrete reformation. The asphalt beneath his feet began to flow, reshaping itself into a series of perfectly angled slopes like a ski jump designed for running. The molecular bonds in the concrete sang under his touch, responding to their natural frequencies with minimal energy expenditure. Izuku sprinted up the incline and launched himself forward, using the track itself as a catapult. His momentum carried him through the air in a perfect arc, landing just past the finish line. 4.13 seconds, the measuring device announced. It wasn't the fastest time that belonged to Iida, but it was respectable, and more importantly, it demonstrated strategic thinking. Interesting application, Aizawa noted, his tired eyes showing a flicker of approval. You used your environment as a tool rather than relying purely on physical enhancement. Next came the grip strength test. While students with obvious physical quirks dominated, Izuku approached the device differently. He touched the metal handle and activated his quirk, causing the internal mechanisms to resonate at their optimal frequency. Resonance touch mechanical amplification, he murmured. The device's springs and gears responded to the molecular vibrations, amplifying the force measurement far beyond what his actual grip strength could produce. 540.3 kg. Holy crap, Kaminari whispered. How is the analysis guy stronger than Kirishima? It's not strength, Todoroki observed quietly. He's manipulating the testing device itself. Clever. But Izuku could feel Aizawa's sharp gaze on him. The teacher had clearly noticed the mechanical manipulation, and his expression suggested he wasn't entirely pleased with the approach. He wants to see what our quirks can actually do, Izuku realized, not how well we can game the system. For the standing long jump, Izuku decided on a more direct approach. He created a pair of spring-loaded platforms from the metal bleachers nearby, using his molecular reconstruction to forge perfect elastic mechanisms. Molecular forge kinetic amplifiers. The springs launched him across the sandbox in a graceful arc, his distance respectable if not record-breaking. The softball throw was where things got interesting. When his turn came, Izuku didn't just pick up the ball, he placed both hands on it and concentrated. Molecular forge, density optimization. The softball's internal structure shifted under his touch. He removed unnecessary mass while maintaining the ball's shape and size, creating a projectile that was significantly lighter but structurally sound. Then, instead of trying to throw hard, he created a launching mechanism. His quirk flowed through the ground beneath his feet, creating a complex mechanical catapult from the available minerals in the soil. Atmospheric Arsenal Trajectory Assist. As the ball launched, Izuku reached out with his quirk toward the air along its flight path. He couldn't create solid constructs from atmospheric gases for very long, but he could create temporary cushions of compressed air that gave the softball additional boosts along its trajectory. 643.7 meters. It wasn't the longest throw. Bakugo's explosive launch still held that record, but it demonstrated something more complex than raw power. Izuku had turned a simple physical test into a showcase of engineering principles and precise quirk control. Remarkable, Iida said, adjusting his glasses. You essentially created a multi-stage rocket using nothing but your quirk and the available environment. The efficiency is what impresses me, Todoroki added, his mismatched eyes studying Izuku with new interest. Most of us are using our quirks like hammers. You're using yours like a precision instrument. But it was Bakugo's reaction that concerned Izuku most. His former friend was staring at him with an expression of barely contained frustration, his fists clenched tight enough that small pops echoed from his palms. The remaining tests continued in similar fashion. Izuku couldn't compete with purely physical quirks like Shoji's multiple arms or Sato's sugar-powered strength, but he consistently found creative applications that showcased his analytical approach. For the sidestep test, he created friction-reducing surfaces beneath his feet. For sit-ups, he used molecular reconstruction to create ergonomic supports that maximized his efficiency. For the distance run, he built lightweight running aids from track materials. By the end of the assessment, Izuku was exhausted but confident. He demonstrated versatility, creativity, and strategic thinking, qualities that should matter for heroic work. "Alright, time for results," Aizawa announced, his device projecting a holographic leaderboard. Izuku found his name in 8th place, not spectacular, but safely in the middle of the pack. Yaoyorozu had claimed 1st place with her creation Quirk's versatility, followed by Todoroki's raw power applications. Bakugo was 3rd, his explosive enhancement proving effective across multiple categories. At the bottom of the list was Hagakure, whose invisibility quirk offered no physical advantages in these particular tests. "By the way," Aizawa said as several students began to panic about last place, "the expulsion thing was a lie, a logical ruse to bring out your best performances." "A lie?" Izuku felt his knees go weak with relief. He was testing our ability to perform under pressure. "Of course it was a lie," Yaoyorozu said calmly. "It wouldn't make sense to expel someone before we'd even had proper hero training." But Izuku noticed that Aizawa's expression suggested the threat hadn't been entirely false. This was a teacher who would absolutely expel students if they proved unworthy. As the class headed back toward the main building, Izuku found himself walking alongside Todoroki and Iida. The three of them had naturally gravitated together during the assessment, their analytical approaches complementing each other. "Your quirk," Todoroki said without preamble, "it's more complex than most people realize, isn't it?" "What do you mean?" "The molecular reconstruction. You're not just changing shapes, you're optimizing materials at the atomic level. That softball wasn't just lighter, it was aerodynamically perfect. The springs you created had ideal elastic coefficients. You're essentially a walking physics laboratory." Izuku felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I've been studying materials science and chemistry to better understand what I can do. My quirk is only as good as my knowledge of how molecules actually work." "Fascinating," Iida's engines revved slightly in his excitement. "You've turned heroic training into an academic pursuit. Most students rely purely on instinct and practice, but you've approached quirk development like a research project." "It's impressive," Todoroki agreed. "My father always said that the most dangerous heroes are the ones who think strategically. Raw power can be predicted and countered, but intelligence adapts." His father, Izuku thought, Endeavor, the number 2 hero. "Your quirk is pretty incredible too," Izuku said. "Fire and ice, that's an amazing combination for both offense and utility applications." Todoroki's expression darkened slightly. "I only use the ice." Before Izuku could ask why, a familiar explosive voice cut through their conversation. "Oi Deku!" Bakugo was stalking toward them, his red eyes blazing with suppressed anger. The other students instinctively stepped back, recognizing the volatile energy radiating from him. "What the hell was that?" Bakugo demanded. "All that fancy science bullshit, you think you're so smart." "Kaken I." "Don't kaken me," Bakugo's palms crackled with small explosions. "You got 8th place with your nerd tricks, I got 3rd with real power, that's the difference between us." "Bakugo-kun," Iida interjected, stepping slightly forward. "Such aggressive behavior toward a classmate is." "Stay out of this, Four Eyes," Bakugo snapped. "This is between me and Deku." Izuku could see the conflict playing out in his former friend's expression. Bakugo had expected to dominate the assessment, to prove his superiority over everyone, especially Izuku, but the results had been more complex than simple power rankings could capture. "You want to know what I think?" Izuku said quietly. "I think you're scared." The temperature around them seemed to drop several degrees. Bakugo's explosion stopped, his entire body going very still. "What did you just say?" "You're scared that your quirk isn't enough anymore, that raw power won't be enough to make you the number 1 hero." Izuku met his former friend's glare without flinching. "You saw what I did during the entrance exam, you saw what I did today, and you realized that maybe, just maybe, the useless kid you've been picking on for years might actually be competition." For a moment, Izuku thought Bakugo might actually attack him right there on the school grounds. The blonde's face was flushed with rage, his fists trembling with barely restrained violence. But then something unexpected happened. Bakugo's expression shifted from anger to something that looked almost like respect. "You know what, Deku?" he said finally, his voice deadly calm. "You're right, I am scared that you might actually be worthy of being my rival." He stepped closer, close enough that Izuku could smell the sharp scent of nitroglycerin that always surrounded him. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to get stronger. I'm going to master my quirk better than anyone has ever mastered theirs. And when I do, I'm going to beat you so completely that there won't be any doubt about who the better hero is." Bakugo turned to leave, then paused, but until then, try to keep up, nerd. As he walked away, leaving Izuku standing with Todoroki and Iida, the green-haired boy felt a strange mixture of apprehension and excitement. He acknowledged me as a rival, Izuku realized. For the first time since we were kids, Kaken sees me as someone worth competing against. That was intense, Iida said, adjusting his glasses nervously. Your relationship with Bakugo is complicated, Todoroki observed. Childhood friends who became rivals. Something like that. Izuku pulled out one of his notebooks and began writing. But he's not wrong. If I want to keep up with the top students in this class, I need to keep improving my quirk applications. He flipped to a fresh page and began sketching molecular diagrams. Resonance touch was just the beginning. If I can learn to match the natural frequencies of different materials, I could potentially manipulate matter without even touching it. Distance-based molecular reconstruction. Quantum entanglement principles, Iida suggested excitedly, if you could establish resonance connections across space. The energy requirements would be enormous, Todoroki added thoughtfully, but theoretically possible. You'd need perfect understanding of molecular structures and extraordinary control. As they walked back toward the main building, the three boys fell into an animated discussion about quirk theory and advanced applications. Izuku found himself grateful for classmates who could match his analytical approach, who saw the science behind heroic abilities as fascinating rather than boring. This is what I've been missing, he thought, people who understand that intelligence can be just as powerful as any physical quirk. But he also knew that Bakugo's challenge was real. The blonde's explosive quirk had incredible potential for growth, and his competitive drive would push him to master every aspect of combat application. Plus ultra, Izuku reminded himself, if I want to become the greatest hero, I need to go beyond what anyone thinks is possible. That evening, alone in his room, Izuku opened his notebook to a fresh page and wrote, Resonance Protocol, Advanced Applications. Underneath, he began sketching plans for techniques that would push his quirk to its absolute limits. Distance-based reconstruction, molecular memory storage, even theoretical applications like transmuting elements or creating entirely new materials. Kaken wants a rivalry, Izuku thought, his pencil moving rapidly across the page. Then I'll give him one he'll never forget. The alarm that shattered the peaceful morning at UA wasn't the usual class bell. It was sharp, urgent, and accompanied by flashing red lights that turned the hallways into a scene from a disaster movie. This is not a drill, came the announcement over the school's PA system. All students and staff, please evacuate to your designated emergency zones immediately. Class 1A had been in the middle of modern literature when the alert began. Aizawa's tired eyes immediately sharpened to full alertness, his hero instincts kicking in. Stay calm and move quickly, he instructed, but Izuku could see the tension in their teacher's posture. This wasn't a scheduled drill. As they filed out of the classroom, Izuku caught sight of the school's main entrance through a window. His blood ran cold. That's not a drill evacuation, those are real villains. A swirling black portal had opened in the courtyard, disgorging dozens of costumed criminals. At the center of the chaos stood a figure Izuku recognized from villain databases, Shigaraki Tamura, his pale hands visible even from this distance. Sensei, Izuku called out, pointing toward the window. Those aren't evacuation vehicles. Aizawa followed his gaze and cursed under his breath. Change of plans, we're going to the USJ facility. All Might should be there and it's more defensible than the main building. The USJ, Izuku thought as they hurried through the corridors. the unforeseen simulation joint, perfect for testing rescue scenarios or for trapping students. 20 minutes later, they stood at the entrance to UA's premier training facility, a massive dome that contained multiple disaster simulation zones. But something was wrong. The lights were dimmer than usual, and an unnatural chill hung in the air. "Stay together," Aizawa ordered as they entered. 13 should be here too. The words died in his throat as they saw the scene below. The central plaza of the USJ was filled with villains, dozens of them, ranging from petty criminals to genuinely dangerous-looking individuals with destructive quirks. At the center stood two figures that made Izuku's analytical mind immediately catalog threat levels: Shigaraki Tamura, whose decay quirk could disintegrate anything he touched, and a massive creature with exposed brain tissue and jet-black skin that radiated power like a living disaster. "Students," 13's voice was tight with worry as the space hero appeared beside them. "This is a real villain attack. We need to evacuate immediately." But before anyone could move, the black portal that had brought the villains began expanding, reaching toward them like grasping fingers. "Kurajiri," Shigaraki's voice echoed across the facility. "Separate them. We can't have All Might students working together." The portal engulfed Class 1A before anyone could react. Izuku felt the sensation of being pulled through liquid darkness, his stomach lurching as space twisted around him. When he finally solidified somewhere, he found himself in the USJ's Landslide zone, a rocky, unstable area designed to simulate natural disasters. He wasn't alone. Uraraka and Iida had been transported with him, both looking as disoriented as he felt. "Where are we?" Uraraka asked, her voice shaky. "Landslide Simulation Zone," Izuku replied, his analytical mind already cataloging their surroundings. "Loose rocks, unstable terrain, limited visibility. It's designed to test rescue operations in earthquake aftermath scenarios." "Which means it's perfect for an ambush," Iida added grimly. As if summoned by his words, villains began emerging from behind the rocky outcroppings. Izuku counted at least 8 of them, each with quirks that seemed suited for this terrain. A man who could control earth and stone, a woman whose body appeared to be made of living granite, others with claws or enhanced strength perfect for navigating rocky ground. "3 little heroes," the earth manipulator said with a cruel grin. "This should be fun." 8 against 3, Izuku calculated rapidly. "But they don't know what we can do. That's our advantage." "Uraraka, Iida," he said quietly, "I have a plan, but I need you to trust me." "What do you need us to do?" Iida asked without hesitation. Izuku knelt and pressed both palms against the rocky ground beneath them. Resonance touch, geological analysis. The stone sang under his quirk, revealing its composition in perfect detail. Limestone, granite, traces of iron ore, silicon compounds, everything he needed for a complete reconstruction arsenal. "This entire zone is my quirk's dream scenario," he said, his confidence building as he understood their environment. "Iida, when I give the signal, use your engines to create as much dust and debris as possible. Uraraka, I need you to make specific rocks weightless on my mark." The villains were advancing now, confident in their numbers and terrain advantage. But they were about to learn why analysis-type heroes were considered the most dangerous opponents, not because of raw power, but because they turned every environment into a weapon. Molecular Forge, Sympathetic Reconstruction. For the first time since developing the technique, Izuku activated his most advanced ability under real combat conditions. Instead of reconstructing materials one at a time, he reached out to multiple types of stone simultaneously, matching their resonance frequencies and commanding them to change in perfect harmony. The results were spectacular. Limestone flowed into calcium carbide spikes that erupted from the ground around the villains. Granite reshaped itself into perfectly balanced throwing weapons. Iron ore separated from its rocky matrix and formed into flexible metal cables. Silicon compounds became razor-sharp glass projectiles that hung in the air awaiting his command. "This is what I've been training for," Izuku thought as his quirk worked on a scale he'd never attempted before. Not just reconstruction, symphonic reconstruction. "Now Iida," he called out. Iida's engines roared to life, his kicks pulverizing loose stones and filling the air with concealing dust. In the same instant, Uraraka touched several of Izuku's newly created weapons, making them weightless and allowing them to float freely around the battlefield. Atmospheric Arsenal Stone Storm. Izuku gestured and his floating weapons launched forward with deadly precision. The weightless projectiles moved faster and more unpredictably than normal throws, striking the villains from impossible angles while the calcium carbide spikes erupted beneath their feet. The Earth Manipulator tried to counter by raising stone barriers, but Izuku's understanding of geological structures was too complete. He simply changed the molecular bonds holding the barriers together, causing them to crumble at precisely the right moments. "What the hell is this kid's quirk?" one of the villains shouted as he dove to avoid a spinning granite blade. "Doesn't matter," the granite woman snarled, her stone-hard fists crashing toward Izuku. "I'll crush him before he can think." But Izuku was already 3 moves ahead. As her fist descended, he touched the ground beneath her feet and activated a technique he'd been theorizing about for weeks. Genesis Protocol Resonance Chain Reaction. Instead of affecting just one type of material, he sent his quirk's resonance through the entire geological structure of the zone. Every piece of stone, every grain of sand, every mineral deposit began vibrating at its natural frequency simultaneously. The effect was like a localized earthquake, but one where Izuku controlled every tremor. The villains lost their footing as the ground shifted beneath them, while his classmates remained steady on the stable patches he'd left untouched. "Incredible," Iida breathed, his engines keeping him balanced despite the chaos. "You're conducting the entire environment like an orchestra." "But that has to be draining you," Uraraka said, concern evident in her voice. "Izuku, your energy levels." She was right. The sympathetic reconstruction technique was pushing his quirk far beyond its normal limits. He could feel his stamina depleting rapidly, but they were winning. The villains were confused, off balance, and running out of options. "Just a little more," he told himself. "I can maintain this long enough too." The attack came from above, a villain with a flying quirk who'd been circling the landslide zone, waiting for an opening. Izuku's comprehensive ground control had left him vulnerable to aerial assault. Sharp talons raked across his shoulder, drawing blood and breaking his concentration. The sympathetic reconstruction wavered, his control over the environment beginning to slip. "Izuku," Uraraka called out, making herself weightless and launching toward the flying villain. But she was too far away, and the attacker was already diving for a second strike. That's when Izuku's emotions finally broke through his analytical calm. "They're targeting my friends. They think they can hurt people I care about." Something deep inside him snapped, not into anger, but into a crystalline clarity he'd never experienced before. His quirk responded to the emotional surge, suddenly feeling less like a tool and more like an extension of his very soul. Atmospheric Arsenal Emergency Protocol. For the first time, Izuku's atmospheric reconstruction worked exactly as he'd envisioned. Instead of struggling to create solid constructs from air molecules, he found himself instinctively understanding the quantum bonds that held gases together. Nitrogen and oxygen flowed together like old friends, forming complex shapes with perfect stability. He created a net of solid air that caught the diving villain, then reshaped it into binding cables that wrapped around the criminal's wings and dragged him to the ground. But he wasn't finished. The emotional breakthrough had unlocked something new in his quirk, a connection to materials that went beyond mere molecular understanding. Molecular Storm Geological Dominion. Every piece of stone, metal, and mineral in the landslide zone responded to his call simultaneously. Weapons formed and launched themselves. Barriers rose and fell in perfect coordination. The ground itself became his ally, shifting to trap villains while creating stable platforms for his classmates. It was the most advanced quirk usage he'd ever achieved, and it lasted exactly long enough to neutralize every remaining threat in their area. When the dust settled, 8 villains lay unconscious or restrained among the rocks, while Izuku collapsed to his knees, completely drained. "That was..." Uraraka helped him sit up, her brown eyes wide with awe. "I've never seen anything like that." "The coordination required," Iida added, adjusting his glasses nervously. "You were manipulating dozens of different materials simultaneously, each with perfect precision. It was like watching a master conductor leading an orchestra of molecules." Izuku tried to respond, but he was too exhausted to form words. The emotional breakthrough had unlocked new levels of his quirk, but at a tremendous cost. He felt like every cell in his body had been wrung out. But we won, he thought weakly. We actually defeated 8 villains working together. In the distance, they could hear sounds of other battles throughout the USJ, explosions that probably meant Bakugo was fighting somewhere. The distinctive sound of Todoroki's ice constructs forming and shattering. We need to regroup with the others, Iida said. Can you move, Midoriya? Give me a minute, Izuku panted. Just need to catch my breath. But as he sat there recovering, his analytical mind was already processing what had happened. The emotional breakthrough, the sympathetic reconstruction, the perfect atmospheric constructs, all of it pointed to something he'd only theorized about in his notebooks. My quirk isn't just molecular reconstruction, he realized. It's something deeper, something about understanding the fundamental connections between all matter. Guys, he said slowly, I think my quirk might be more than what we thought. Before his classmates could respond, a thunderous crash echoed from the central plaza. Through the dust and debris, they could see a massive shape moving, the creature with exposed brain tissue that had been standing beside Shigaraki. That's not a normal villain, Uraraka whispered. What is that thing? Izuku struggled to his feet, his legs still shaky from exhaustion. But his analytical mind was working overtime, cataloging the creature's visible features and matching them against theoretical models he'd read about in underground research papers. Exposed brain tissue, shock absorption capabilities, designed for combat against specific targets. It's called a Namu, he said quietly, an artificial human, bioengineered specifically to fight All Might. The implications hit them all at once. If that creature was designed to fight the symbol of peace, then whoever was behind this attack had resources and knowledge far beyond ordinary villains. We have to help, Iida said, his engines already beginning to rev. Wait, Izuku held up a hand, his strategic mind overriding his heroic instincts. Look at the situation. Zawa-sensei is down there fighting multiple opponents while protecting the other students. The Namu is designed specifically to counter All Might's fighting style, and All Might isn't here. So what do we do? Uraraka asked. Izuku looked down at his hands, still tingling with residual energy from his quirk breakthrough. He thought about sympathetic reconstruction, about his new understanding of molecular connections, about the way materials seem to respond to his emotional state as much as his conscious will. I'm not strong enough to fight that creature directly, he admitted to himself. But maybe I don't need to. We do what heroes do, he said, pulling out one of his notebooks and quickly sketching a battle plan. We find a way to turn our weaknesses into strengths. He looked up at his classmates, seeing determination reflected in their faces despite the overwhelming odds they faced. Iida, how fast can you run to get help? Uraraka, how much weight can you affect at once? Because I have an idea that's either brilliant or completely insane. With you, Uraraka said with a smile, it's probably both. As they prepared to rejoin the larger battle, Izuku felt something shift inside him. The scared, analytical boy who'd entered UA was still there, but he was no longer alone. The emotional breakthrough had awakened something new, not just advanced quirk techniques, but the confidence to believe in his own strategic mind. Plus ultra, he thought, gripping his notebook tightly. Time to go beyond what anyone thinks is possible. The sports festival was everything UA promised it would be, a spectacle of quirks, athleticism, and heroic ambition broadcast live to the entire world. As Izuku stood in the competitor tunnel beneath the stadium, he could hear the roar of 50,000 spectators above, all waiting to see the next generation of heroes prove themselves. 3 weeks since the USJ attack, 3 weeks of intensive training and media attention. The villain incident had thrust Class 1A into the spotlight earlier than anyone expected. Reporters had swarmed the school, asking pointed questions about UA's security and the students who'd helped repel the attack. Izuku's role in defeating 8 villains had earned him particular attention and scrutiny. The obstacle course, cavalry battle, and tournament bracket, he muttered to himself, reviewing his strategy notes. Each stage will test different aspects of quirk application and tactical thinking. Still muttering to yourself, I see. Todoroki appeared beside him, his mismatched eyes calm despite the pressure of performing for millions of viewers. Are you ready? As ready as I can be, Izuku closed his notebook and slipped it into his jacket. What about you? This is a big opportunity to show what you can do. Todoroki's expression darkened slightly. My father will be watching. He has expectations. Before Izuku could respond, Present Mike's voice boomed across the stadium. Let's welcome our first-year students. Give it up for Class 1A. They emerged into blazing sunlight and deafening cheers. The stadium was massive, easily the largest venue Izuku had ever seen, with camera drones buzzing overhead to capture every angle. In the VIP section, he could spot pro heroes, government officials, and talent scouts from major agencies. Everyone who matters in the hero world is watching, he realized. This isn't just a school festival, it's a showcase for our entire futures. And now, Present Mike continued. Let's hear from our student representative, Izuku Midoriya from Class 1A. Student representative Izuku's stomach dropped as he realized what was happening. They want me to give a speech in front of 50,000 people. But as he approached the microphone, his analytical mind kicked in. This was just another problem to solve, another situation requiring strategic thinking. Everyone here has worked incredibly hard to reach this point, he began, his voice carrying clearly across the stadium thanks to Present Mike's sound system. We've trained, studied, and pushed ourselves beyond what we thought possible. But today isn't just about proving our strength, it's about proving our character. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces in the stadium, then at his fellow students behind him. The world is watching us, wondering if we have what it takes to be the next generation of heroes. Let's show them that intelligence, determination, and the courage to protect others are just as important as raw power. Let's show them what plus ultra really means. The crowd erupted in applause, and Izuku felt a surge of confidence as he stepped back. He'd managed to deliver an inspiring message without making any enemies among his classmates, no small feat when everyone was about to compete against each other. Well said. Midnight, the R-rated hero, took the microphone with her characteristic dramatic flair. Now then, let's get this festival started. The first trial is the obstacle course. A massive gate rose behind them, revealing a track that stretched into the distance with various hazards and challenges visible along its length. A 4-kilometer run through UA's most diabolical obstacles, Midnight explained. Anything goes as long as you don't leave the course boundaries. Now, start. The gate exploded open and nearly 100 students surged forward in a chaotic mass. But Izuku had been expecting this moment. He'd studied footage from previous years and developed a specific strategy. Instead of fighting through the crowd at the narrow entrance, he pressed both palms against the ground and activated his quirk. Molecular Forge Friction Elimination. The asphalt beneath his feet became frictionless, not slippery, but perfectly smooth at the molecular level. He glided forward like he was on ice, passing the struggling mass of students who were pushing and shoving through the bottleneck. First obstacle, the robot minefield. Massive mechanical sentries from the entrance exam blocked the path ahead, their sensors already locking onto the approaching students. Most competitors were preparing for direct confrontation, but Izuku had a different approach in mind. He knelt and touched the metal track surface, his quirk analyzing its composition. Steel, aluminum, traces of copper from electrical systems, everything he needed. Sympathetic reconstruction, harmonic frequency. Instead of trying to destroy the robots, Izuku sent his quirk through the metal track they were standing on. Every piece of steel and aluminum began vibrating at precisely the right frequency to interfere with the robots' balance systems and targeting computers. The massive machines began swaying and stumbling as their internal gyroscopes received conflicting signals. Within seconds, they'd toppled over or crashed into each other, creating clear pathways through the minefield without a single explosion or combat technique. Incredible, Present Mike's voice echoed across the course. Midoriya has neutralized the entire robot field using nothing but precise frequency manipulation. That's what I call working smarter, not harder. The crowd's roar was thunderous as Izuku sprinted through the fallen robots, but he could hear heavy footsteps behind him. Bakugo was closing the distance, his explosions propelling him forward with raw speed and power. Think you're so clever, Deku, Bakugo snarled as he drew alongside. Let's see how your science tricks handle this. Second obstacle, the ice field. Massive ice formations blocked the track ahead, Todoroki's handiwork, no doubt. The dual quirk user had frozen the entire path solid, creating treacherous terrain that would slow down most competitors. But Bakugo simply blasted through with explosive power, melting and shattering ice barriers through sheer force. Other students with fire or heat-based quirks were following similar strategies. Izuku took a different approach. Resonance touch, thermal conductivity. Instead of melting the ice, he touched it and altered its molecular structure. The frozen water became a perfect thermal conductor, rapidly absorbing heat from the surrounding air and ground. The ice began sublimating, turning directly from solid to gas, creating clear passages without the explosive violence other students were using. More efficient, less energy expenditure, and no risk of injuring other competitors, he noted as he glided through the sublimating ice field. Unbelievable, Present Mike continued his commentary. Midoriya is essentially conducting a chemistry experiment at full sprint. He's not just overcoming obstacles, he's fundamentally changing their properties. Third obstacle, the tightrope chasm. A deep gorge stretched across the track, spanned only by steel cables that most students would have to balance across carefully. Falls weren't fatal thanks to safety nets below, but they would cost precious time. Izuku barely slowed down. Molecular forge cable enhancement. As he stepped onto the tightrope, his quirk flowed through the steel cable, optimizing its molecular structure for maximum stability and grip. The thin wire became as stable as a bridge under his feet, allowing him to sprint across without any risk of losing balance. But he wasn't alone on the cables. Bakugo had followed him onto the tightrope, using controlled explosions to maintain his balance while pursuing. "You can't run forever, nerd," Bakugo shouted, his palms crackling with nitroglycerin. "When this obstacle course is over, you'll have to face me directly." "I'm not running," Izuku called back, "I'm thinking." As they reached the far side of the chasm, Izuku could see the finish line ahead. But more importantly, he could see who was already there, Todoroki, his ice quirk having allowed him to essentially create his own route through most obstacles. He's been holding back, Izuku realized, watching Todoroki cross the finish line with calm precision. Using only his ice side, never his fire. But even with that limitation, his tactical use of environmental manipulation is incredible. Izuku crossed second with Bakugo close behind in third. The crowd was on its feet, cheering for the impressive displays they'd witnessed, but Izuku's mind was already moving to the next challenge. "Outstanding," Midnight announced as the remaining students finished the obstacle course. The top 42 competitors will advance to the second trial, the Cavalry battle. As the rules were explained, teams of 4, point values based on placement, steal headbands from other teams. Izuku found himself analyzing not just the tactical requirements, but the social dynamics that would determine team formation. Everyone will want to avoid the student with the most points, he thought, looking around at his potential teammates. That's Todoroki, but they'll also be wary of me after that obstacle course performance. Midoriya Uraraka appeared at his side, her smile bright despite the competitive atmosphere. "Want to team up? I saw what you did out there, that was amazing." "Me too," Ida jointed them, his engines still cooling from the obstacle course. "Your strategic approach was masterful. A team combining your analysis, my speed, and Uraraka's gravity manipulation could be formidable." Before Izuku could respond, a quiet voice interrupted them. "I want to team up with you." They turned to see a girl with pink hair and skin, strange devices mounted on her arms. Izuku recognized her from the support course, Hatsume, whose inventions had caught his attention during the obstacle course. "You're the one with molecular reconstruction, right?" Hatsume's eyes gleamed with enthusiasm. "I've been watching your quirk applications. The frequency manipulation, the thermal conductivity changes, the friction elimination. You're basically doing what my bobbies do, but with pure scientific understanding." "Your bobbies?" Uraraka asked, confused. "My inventions," Hatsume clarified, patting the devices on her arms fondly. "But working with someone who can alter materials at the molecular level. Think of the possibilities. I could create the tools, you could optimize them in real time." Izuku's analytical mind immediately saw the potential. Support items that can be modified during combat based on changing tactical requirements. Adaptive technology that responds to environmental conditions. Exactly, Hatsum's grin was infectious. Plus, I've been studying your quirk applications. I have some ideas for equipment that could help with your energy efficiency issues. A team that combines tactical analysis, mobility, gravity manipulation, and adaptive support technology, Izuku thought. The synergy could be incredible. All right, he said, looking around at his potential teammates. Let's do this, but remember, we're not just trying to win. We're trying to show the world what heroes can accomplish when they work together intelligently. As the teams formed and took their positions around the arena, Izuku felt the familiar tingle of his quirk responding to his emotional state. But this time, it wasn't fear or desperation driving the response, it was confidence. I've trained for this, he reminded himself. I've studied every possible scenario, analyzed every potential opponent, and prepared countermeasures for every major quirk type in our class. The cavalry battle will last 15 minutes, Midnight announced. Each team's points are determined by their members' individual scores, with the rider wearing the headband worth the total. The 10 million point headband goes to our first place finisher, Todoroki Shoto. 10 million points, Izuku noted. Every team will be targeting him, which means they'll be ignoring lower value targets until the final minutes. But as he looked around the arena, he noticed something that made his analytical mind recalculate their chances. Several teams were looking at him with predatory interest, not at Todoroki, but at him. They remember the USJ incident, he realized, and they saw the obstacle course. They know I'm more dangerous than my point value suggests. Team Midoriya, Present Mike's voice boomed. With 215 points and some of the most creative quirk applications we've seen today, they're definitely a dark horse in this competition. Izuku took his position as the rider, with Iida providing mobility, Uraraka handling gravity manipulation, and Hatsum contributing technological support. As the countdown began, he felt his teammates' trust and determination through their physical connection. This isn't just about individual skill anymore, he thought. This is about proving that intelligence, cooperation, and scientific understanding can overcome raw power. Begin. The arena exploded into chaos as 9 teams launched into motion, but Izuku's team moved with practiced coordination they'd developed during their brief planning session. Iida, evasive pattern delta, Izuku called out. Uraraka, prepare gravity assist for overhead escape. Hatsum, deploy resonance amplifiers. As his teammates responded with perfect synchronization, Izuku pressed his palms against the metal framework of Hatsum's support gear and activated his quirk. Molecular Forge Adaptive Arsenal. The support items began to shift and change under his touch, optimizing themselves for the specific challenges they faced. Defensive plates emerged from the metal framework. Aerodynamic surfaces formed to assist Uraraka's gravity manipulation. Even the headband itself gained molecular anchors that would make it nearly impossible to steal through brute force. This is what teamwork looks like when everyone understands their role, Izuku thought as they darted between other teams, avoiding conflicts while positioning themselves for the final moments of the battle. But he could see Bakugo's team closing in, the blonde's explosive mobility making him incredibly dangerous in this environment. And Todoroki's team was moving with surgical precision, their massive point total making them everyone's primary target, but their coordination keeping them safe. The real battle is just beginning. The internship letter from the Yora agency arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after the sports festival's explosive conclusion. Izuku stared at the elegant letterhead, barely believing what he was reading. Dr. Tatsuma Yori requests the honor of your presence for a week-long internship focusing on scientific heroics and advanced quirk applications. The sports festival had ended with his team placing second in the cavalry battle and Izuku reaching the semifinals of the tournament bracket before losing to Todoroki in a match that showcased both their analytical approaches to combat. But more importantly, it had caught the attention of heroes who valued intelligence over raw power. The armor hero Yori, his mother read over his shoulder. I've heard of him. He's famous for his scientific approach to hero work. Didn't he develop some of the support equipment that other heroes use? He has a PhD in materials science, Izuku said, his excitement barely contained. His quirk lets him understand and optimize the molecular structure of any material he touches. He's basically what I could become with years more experience and education. And he specifically requested me, Izuku thought. Out of all the students who got internship offers, he chose to work with the molecular reconstruction user. The Yora agency occupied a sleek building in Tokyo's business district, but the real work happened in the basement laboratories. When Izuku arrived for his first day, he felt like he'd stepped into a dream version of his own future. Welcome, young Midoriya. Dr. Yora was a tall, lean man in his 40s, his dark hair streaked with premature gray that spoke of long nights spent in research. His hero costume was understated, a white lab coat reinforced with plates of his signature adaptive armor. I've been following your progress with great interest. Thank you for the opportunity, sir, Izuku replied formally. I've studied your research papers on molecular optimization theory. Your work on biocompatible materials is incredible. Flattery will get you everywhere, Yori said with a slight smile. But more importantly, it tells me you understand that here at work isn't just about fighting villains. Come, let me show you what real scientific heroics looks like. The laboratory was a wonderland of advanced equipment and ongoing experiments. Molecular analyzers, crystallization chambers, materials testing rigs, and computers running complex simulations filled every available surface. Most heroes think their quirks are gifts from nature, Yori explained as he led Izuku through the facility. But you and I know better. Our quirks are tools, incredibly sophisticated tools that become more powerful the more we understand about how they actually work. He gestured to a wall covered with molecular diagrams and chemical equations. I've spent 20 years studying the theoretical foundations of matter manipulation. Every technique I've developed started as a hypothesis, became an experiment, and only then became a practical heroic application. That's exactly how I've been approaching my own quirk development, Izuku said, pulling out one of his notebooks. I keep detailed records of every technique, analyzing energy efficiency, molecular requirements, and potential applications. Yori's eyes lit up as he flipped through Izuku's notes. Sympathetic reconstruction, atmospheric arsenal, Genesis protocol, these aren't just techniques, they're entire theoretical frameworks. How long have you been developing this systematic approach? About 3 years of serious study, Izuku replied. But I've been thinking about the science behind my quirk since it first manifested. Remarkable, most pro heroes don't achieve this level of theoretical understanding until they've been working for a decade. Yori closed the notebook and looked at Izuku with new respect. Tell me, what do you think is the ultimate potential of molecular reconstruction quirks? Izuku considered the question carefully. Complete matter manipulation. If we could understand and control molecular bonds with perfect precision, we could theoretically rearrange any substance into any other substance with the same constituent elements, healing damaged tissue, creating any tool or weapon needed, even environmental restoration on a massive scale. And the limitations. Energy requirements scale exponentially with complexity, understanding you can't manipulate what you don't comprehend at the molecular level. And Izuku hesitated. Go on. Emotional state seems to affect efficiency. During high-stress situations, my quirk responds differently, more powerfully but less predictably. Yori nodded thoughtfully. The connection between mental state and quirk performance is still poorly understood, but there's definitely a correlation, which brings me to why I really requested your internship. He led Izuku to a secured section of the laboratory, requiring both keycard and biometric access. Inside, a single hospital bed sat surrounded by the most advanced medical equipment Izuku had ever seen. Dr. Yori, Izuku said slowly, what is this place? A research facility focused on bioreconstruction applications, specifically using molecular manipulation quirks for medical treatment. Yori's expression grew serious. There's someone I've been trying to help, someone whose injuries have been considered irreversible by conventional medicine. Bioreconstruction, Izuku thought, using molecular manipulation to heal damaged tissue. The theoretical applications are incredible, but the complexity. You want me to help develop healing applications, he said. I want you to meet someone first. Yori activated an intercom system. Sir, if you're ready, there's someone I'd like you to meet. The door to an adjacent room opened, and Izuku's world stopped. All Might stepped through the doorway, but not the All Might from television broadcasts or public appearances. This was All Might as he truly was, gaunt, hollow-cheeked, with a massive scar across his torso that was visible even through his civilian clothes. "Young Midoriya," All Might said, his voice lacking its usual booming confidence. "Dr. Yor has told me about your remarkable quirk. I understand you've been developing techniques that might be relevant to my situation." All Might is injured. Izuku's analytical mind cataloged the evidence. Severely injured. That scar, the weight loss, the way he's carrying himself, this isn't temporary damage. This is permanent injury that's been affecting him for years. "Sir," Izuku said carefully, "I've been working on bioreconstruction theory, but I've never attempted anything on living tissue. The complexity of biological systems is exactly why we need someone with your level of theoretical understanding," Yori interrupted. "I've been studying All Might's injuries for months. The damage is extensive, not just to external tissues, but to internal organs. His left lung, parts of his digestive system, even his skeletal structure in the affected area." All Might sat heavily on the edge of the hospital bed. "5 years ago, I fought a villain whose quirk could inflict wounds that resist conventional healing. The battle left me diminished. I can only maintain my hero form for a few hours each day, and that time is decreasing." The symbol of peace is dying, Izuku realized with crystalline clarity. That's why he's been less visible lately. That's why some of his recent public appearances seemed forced. He's literally running out of time. "What do you need from me?" Izuku asked. "Understanding," Yori replied. "I can optimize existing tissue, but I can't recreate what's been completely destroyed. Your sympathetic reconstruction technique, the ability to coordinate multiple molecular types simultaneously, might be the key to rebuilding complex biological structures." He activated a holographic display showing detailed scans of All Might's injuries. The damaged areas aren't just missing tissue, they're scar tissue that's actively interfering with normal biological function. We need someone who can not only reconstruct healthy tissue, but coordinate the reconstruction of multiple organ systems working together. Izuku studied the medical data, his mind automatically beginning to process the challenges involved. The energy requirements would be enormous, and the risk, if I made a mistake at the molecular level with living tissue. "I understand the risks," All Might said quietly, "but without intervention, my condition will continue to deteriorate. Within a year, maybe 2, I won't be able to function as a hero at all." "The world needs All Might," Izuku thought. "He's not just a hero, he's the symbol of peace. If he falls, the crime rate will skyrocket, public morale will collapse, everything he's built will crumble." "I'll need to study the theoretical requirements," Izuku said finally. "Bioreconstruction is exponentially more complex than inorganic matter manipulation. I'll need to understand cellular structures, organ systems, biological chemistry." "I can provide resources," Yori offered. "Access to medical databases, research materials, even consultation with biomedical specialists who have been briefed on the situation." "And I can offer something else," All Might added. "Training, real combat experience. If you're going to attempt something this complex, you'll need to push your quirk to its absolute limits. I can help you discover those limits safely." Izuku looked between the two men, one of the most brilliant scientific heroes of his generation, and the greatest hero in the world, both placing their trust in his analytical approach and theoretical understanding. "This is what I've been training for," he realized. "Not just to be a hero, but to use my quirk in ways that no one else has ever attempted." "I'll do it," he said, "but I need time to prepare. The theoretical framework alone will take weeks to develop, and then I'll need to practice with simpler biological systems before attempting anything on." "On me," All Might finished. "I understand. Take all the time you need, young Midoriya, but know that you may be the only person in the world capable of giving me back my future." As they began planning the research phase, Izuku felt the familiar tingle of his quirk responding to his emotional state. But this time, it wasn't excitement or fear, it was purpose. "Genesis Protocol Biological Applications," he wrote in his notebook that evening. "Theoretical framework for reconstructing living tissue at the molecular level. Stage 1, understanding cellular structures and biological chemistry. Stage 2, practice with simple biological systems, plants, simple organisms. Stage 3, development of energy-efficient bioreconstruction techniques. Stage 4, coordination of multiple organ systems. Stage 5, full-scale healing attempt. Note, emotional state correlation may be even more important for biological work. Living tissue appears to respond to intent and emotional resonance, not just molecular manipulation. This isn't just about healing All Might, he thought as he closed the notebook. This is about proving that molecular reconstruction can become one of the most important heroic applications in the world. If I can master bioreconstruction, I won't just be saving one hero, I'll be pioneering an entirely new field of heroic medicine. The next morning, Izuku arrived at the Yori agency with renewed determination and 3 new notebooks dedicated entirely to biological applications. Dr. Yori was waiting with a stack of medical textbooks and a schedule that would have challenged a graduate student. Ready to revolutionize heroic medicine? Yori asked with a smile. Plus Ultra, Izuku replied, opening the first textbook to begin his crash course in biomolecular reconstruction. Time to go beyond the limits of what anyone thinks is possible. The basement laboratory of Yori Agency had become Izuku's second home over the past month. Medical textbooks lay open across every surface, their pages filled with his meticulous notes on cellular biology, organ systems, and the intricate dance of molecular processes that kept the human body functioning. 4 weeks of intensive study, 4 weeks of pushing my understanding of biological systems beyond anything I thought possible. Your theoretical framework is solid, Dr. Yori said, reviewing Izuku's latest research notes. But theory and practice are very different things when it comes to biological reconstruction. Izuku nodded, his attention focused on the small terrarium before him. Inside, a wilted plant sat in carefully prepared soil, his first test subject for bioreconstruction applications. Cellular structures are exponentially more complex than inorganic materials, he murmured, extending his hand toward the dying plant. But the principles should be similar, understanding the molecular damage, then providing the right conditions for repair. He activated his quirk gently, his consciousness extending into the plant's cellular structure. Through his molecular perception, he could see the damage clearly: dehydrated cells, broken cellular walls, disrupted chloroplast structures. Genesis Protocol, Biological Restoration. Instead of forcing dramatic changes, Izuku worked with the plant's existing biological processes. He reconstructed damaged cellular membranes, restored the molecular structure of chlorophyll, and optimized the plant's ability to absorb water and nutrients from the soil. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable. Wilted leaves straightened and regained their green color. Stems that had been drooping stood tall again. Within minutes, the plant looked healthier than it had before being deliberately damaged. Remarkable, Dr. Yori breathed. You're not just healing the damage, you're optimizing the entire biological system. Living tissue wants to be healthy, Izuku said, his voice slightly strained from the effort. My quirk just helps it remember how. But that was a simple plant, he thought. All Might's injuries are infinitely more complex. Are you ready for the next phase? Dr. Yori asked. Through the laboratory's secure door, All Might waited in the medical facility. Over the past month, he'd been providing combat training while Izuku studied biological theory. The symbol of peace had pushed him harder than any training he'd ever experienced, forcing his quirk to evolve under extreme stress conditions. He's been preparing me for this moment, Izuku realized, not just to understand biological reconstruction, but to perform it under pressure. I'm ready, Izuku said, though his stomach churned with nervous energy. They entered the medical facility to find All Might seated on the examination table, his hero costume replaced with a hospital gown that revealed the full extent of his scarring. Advanced medical scanners surrounded him, monitoring every vital sign. Young Midoriya, All Might said, his voice carrying none of its usual confidence. Are you certain about this? The risks to both of us. I've run every calculation I can think of, Izuku replied, pulling out his most recent notebook. The theoretical energy requirements are manageable if I use sympathetic reconstruction to coordinate multiple biological systems simultaneously. But sir? He paused, looking directly at the symbol of peace. This isn't just about molecular manipulation anymore. Bioreconstruction seems to respond to emotional resonance to the intent behind the healing. I'll need you to trust me completely. All Might smiled, not his public hero smile, but something genuine and warm. Young Midoriya, I've watched you develop techniques that should be theoretically impossible. I've seen you defeat villains using pure analytical thinking. If anyone can do this, it's you. Dr. Yor activated the medical scanners, providing real-time feedback on All Might's biological systems. Remember, we're not trying to restore everything at once, just the primary organ damage in the thoracic cavity, the lung tissue, the digestive system components, and the skeletal structures. Start with the simplest systems and work toward the most complex, Izuku reminded himself. Bone tissue first, then organs, then the integration between systems. He placed both hands on All Might's chest, feeling the irregular scar tissue beneath his palms. Through his quirk, he could perceive the full extent of the damage. It was even worse than the medical scans had suggested. This isn't just physical trauma, he realized. There's something else, something that's actively preventing natural healing. Dr. Yor, he said slowly, these injuries aren't just from physical damage. There's some kind of interference pattern, like the molecular bonds have been programmed to resist reconstruction. The villain's quirk, All Might said grimly, it didn't just cause wounds, it left behind a kind of molecular signature that prevents proper healing. That's why conventional medical treatment hasn't worked, Izuku understood. The injuries are being actively maintained by residual quirk effects. Genesis Protocol, Signature Analysis. Instead of trying to heal the damage immediately, Izuku focused his quirk on understanding the interference pattern. It was like a molecular virus, a foreign influence that kept the damaged tissue locked in its traumatized state. I have to remove this influence before I can attempt any reconstruction. Genesis Protocol, Purification Matrix. This was the most delicate work he'd ever attempted. Using his understanding of molecular resonance, Izuku began identifying and neutralizing the foreign quirk signatures embedded in All Might's damaged tissue. It was like performing surgery at the atomic level, requiring perfect precision and unwavering concentration. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked, his quirk operating at levels of complexity he'd never attempted before. But gradually, he could feel the interference pattern weakening, the molecular virus being systematically eliminated. Now, he whispered, Genesis Protocol, Biological Reconstruction. With the foreign influence removed, Izuku's quirk flowed through All Might's damaged systems like water through a drought-stricken landscape. But this wasn't the forced reconstruction he used on inorganic materials. This was collaboration between his molecular manipulation and All Might's own biological processes. He started with the skeletal damage, using his understanding of bone chemistry to reconstruct the calcium phosphate structures that had been destroyed. But instead of simply replacing the missing bone, he optimized the molecular arrangement, creating bone tissue that was actually stronger than the original. The ribs are responding perfectly, he noted as he felt the bone structures reforming under his touch. Now for the lung tissue. Lung reconstruction was exponentially more complex. The delicate alveolar structures, the network of blood vessels, the precise chemical balance required for gas exchange, all of it had to be rebuilt with perfect coordination. Sympathetic reconstruction, pulmonary system. Izuku's quirk reached out to multiple types of tissue simultaneously. Epithelial cells formed the air sacs. Capillary networks wove through the reconstructed tissue. Even the molecular structure of the surfactant that lined the alveoli was carefully optimized for maximum efficiency. All Might's breathing deepened noticeably as his lung capacity began to return. The medical scanners showed oxygen saturation levels rising for the first time in years. But the most challenging work was yet to come, the digestive system components that had been completely destroyed. Stomach lining, sections of the small intestine, part of the liver, Izuku cataloged the missing structures. I'll need to reconstruct not just the tissue, but the complex biochemical processes they support. Genesis Protocol, Systemic Integration. This technique pushed Izuku's quirk beyond anything he'd ever attempted. Instead of reconstructing each organ separately, he began building them as an integrated system. Stomach tissue that could produce the right enzymes, intestinal walls with perfect absorption capabilities, liver cells optimized for their hundreds of metabolic functions. The energy drain was enormous. Izuku could feel his strength being pulled from every cell in his body, his quirk demanding more power than he'd ever channeled before. But he pressed on, driven by the knowledge that All Might's future and the future of heroic society depended on his success. Almost there, he thought, as the last of the major organ damage was repaired. Just need to coordinate everything, make sure all the systems work together. Genesis Protocol, Harmonic Resonance. For his final technique, Izuku reached out to All Might's entire biological system. Every cell, every organ, every molecular process, he brought them all into perfect harmonic alignment. It was like conducting an orchestra of biological functions, each one playing its part in the symphony of life. The medical scanners went wild as All Might's vital signs normalized for the first time in years. His breathing was deep and regular. His heart rate was strong and steady. Even his muscle mass began to return as his body remembered what it felt like to function properly. When Izuku finally lifted his hands from All Might's chest, the symbol of peace looked like a different person. The gaunt, hollow appearance was gone, replaced by the powerful physique that had made him the world's greatest hero. "How do you feel?" Dr. Yor asked, his voice filled with awe. All Might sat up slowly, then stood. His movements were fluid and confident, showing none of the careful stiffness he'd displayed for years. "I feel," All Might paused, then broke into his trademark smile, but this time it was genuine rather than forced. "I feel like myself again." To demonstrate, he flexed slightly and his civilian form began to shift. Muscles expanded, his height increased, and within seconds he stood before them in his true hero form, not the weakened version he'd been maintaining through sheer willpower, but his actual, fully powered state. "Young Midoriya," his voice boomed with its characteristic enthusiasm. "You've given me back my future." But Izuku was barely conscious to hear it. The Genesis Protocol had drained every reserve of energy he possessed. He collapsed to his knees, then toppled forward entirely. "I did it," was his last coherent thought before exhaustion claimed him. "I actually did it." 2 days later, Izuku woke up in a hospital bed, every muscle in his body aching like he'd run a marathon while lifting weights. Recovery Girl was seated beside him, her expression mixing professional concern with barely contained excitement. "3 days of quirk exhaustion," she said briskly. "Most students would have been unconscious for a week after what you attempted. Your recovery rate is remarkable." All Might, Izuku croaked. "Perfectly healthy, better than healthy. Actually, Dr. Yori says you optimized his biological systems beyond their original specifications." Recovery Girl leaned forward. "Young man, do you realize what you've accomplished? You've successfully performed the most complex bioreconstruction in recorded history." Izuku tried to sit up, wincing at the effort. It was just applied molecular theory, understanding the biological systems and working with them instead of against them. "Just applied molecular theory," Recovery Girl laughed. "You've revolutionized the entire field of heroic medicine. Dr. Yori is already getting requests from hospitals worldwide to study your techniques." Before Izuku could respond, the door burst open and All Might strode in, not the diminished version from the past few years, but the full-powered symbol of peace in all his glory. "Young Midoriya," he boomed, then immediately lowered his voice when Recovery Girl glared at him. "Sorry, young Midoriya, I wanted to thank you personally for what you've done." "You don't need to thank me," Izuku said. "The world needs All Might. I just helped with the technical aspects." "You did far more than that." All Might sat down beside the bed, his expression growing serious. "You've shown me that the next generation of heroes will accomplish things I never dreamed possible. Your analytical approach, your dedication to understanding rather than just applying power, it's going to change everything." Dr. Yori appeared in the doorway, carrying a thick folder of documents. "Izuku, I hope you're prepared for some changes in your life. Word about your bioreconstruction capabilities has reached some very important people." "What kind of changes?" "Research grants, medical partnerships, government consultation requests." Yori set the folder down with a significant thump. "You've just proven that molecular reconstruction quirks can heal injuries that conventional medicine considers impossible. Every hospital, every hero agency, every research institution in the world wants to work with you." Izuku stared at the folder, feeling overwhelmed. I'm still just a first-year student at UA. Not anymore, All Might said with a smile. Oh, you'll still attend classes and complete your hero training, but you've also become something unprecedented, a student who's already revolutionizing the field he's studying. As the implications began to sink in, Izuku felt his quirk responding to his emotional state. The familiar tingle was there, but something was different. The bioreconstruction work had changed his understanding of his own abilities in fundamental ways. I'm not just manipulating matter anymore, he realized. I'm working with the fundamental processes of life itself. There's something else, Dr. Yor added. During the reconstruction process, we recorded some unusual energy readings. Your quirk seems to have evolved during the procedure. Evolved how? We're not entirely sure yet, but initial tests suggest you can now affect biological systems at a distance, not just through direct contact. The implications for field medicine and rescue work. Recovery Girl nodded enthusiastically. You could potentially heal injured heroes during active combat situations, stabilize victims at disaster sites, even provide medical support for large-scale emergencies. Distance-based bioreconstruction, Izuku thought. If I can master that technique, I won't just be a hero, I'll be able to save lives in ways no one has ever imagined. But with the excitement came a sobering realization. The Genesis Protocol had pushed his quirk to its absolute limits and beyond. He'd succeeded in healing All Might, but at enormous personal cost. If I'm going to use bioreconstruction regularly, I'll need to develop much more efficient techniques, he noted mentally. And I'll need to understand the long-term effects of pushing my quirk this hard. For now, Recovery Girl said firmly, you need rest and recovery. No quirk usage for at least a week. Your molecular reconstruction abilities need time to stabilize after such intensive use. As the adults filed out of the room, leaving him alone with his thoughts, Izuku pulled out a notebook and began writing. Genesis Protocol, Biological Reconstruction, Complete Success. Results, full restoration of All Might's damaged organ systems. Patient shows improved biological function beyond original specifications. Personal effects, quirk evolution apparent, distance-based bioreconstruction now theoretically possible. Energy requirements remain extremely high. Next steps, develop more efficient bioreconstruction techniques. Study the connection between emotional state and biological healing. Investigate potential applications for mass casualty scenarios. Note, this isn't just about healing individual injuries anymore. If I can master these techniques, I might be able to address some of the fundamental challenges facing heroic society. He closed the notebook and lay back against his pillows, feeling the weight of new possibilities and responsibilities settling around him. All Might is healthy again. The symbol of peace can continue protecting the world. But more than that, I've proven that molecular reconstruction can tackle problems that seemed impossible. Whatever comes next, I'm ready for it. The news of All Might's miraculous recovery spread through the hero community like wildfire, though the public remained unaware of the true details. To the world, the symbol of peace had simply overcome a minor health issue and returned to full active duty. Only a select few knew about the teenager who had revolutionized heroic medicine in a basement laboratory. 2 weeks since the Genesis Protocol, 2 weeks of media attention, research requests, and the strangest feeling that my quirk has fundamentally changed. Izuku sat in his dorm room at UA, surrounded by get-well cards from classmates and official correspondence from hero agencies worldwide. But his attention was focused on a small potted plant on his desk, one he hadn't touched in 3 days. The plant was thriving, more than thriving actually, it was growing at an accelerated rate, its leaves a more vibrant green than should have been naturally possible, and Izuku could feel it. Distance-based molecular resonance, he thought, extending his hand toward the plant without making contact. I can sense its molecular structure from here. I can feel the cellular processes, the flow of nutrients, even the photosynthesis happening in real time. Quantum resonance biological monitor, he whispered, activating his quirk without physical contact. The sensation was extraordinary. Through some form of molecular connection he didn't fully understand, Izuku could perceive the plant's entire biological system as clearly as if he were touching it. Every cell, every chemical reaction, every tiny process that kept it alive, all of it was open to his consciousness. This is what happened during the Genesis protocol, he realized. The bioreconstruction didn't just heal All Might, it created some kind of resonance connection between us, and now that connection has taught my quirk to work at a distance. A knock at his door interrupted his experimentation. Midoriya, it was Todoroki's voice. Are you available? There's something I'd like to discuss. Izuku opened the door to find not just Todoroki, but also Iida and several other classmates gathered in the hallway. Their expressions were serious, concerned. Is everything all right? Izuku asked. That's what we wanted to ask you, Iida said, adjusting his glasses. Your recent absence from classes, the rumors about some kind of advanced medical procedure, we're worried about you. And there's something else, Todoroki added quietly. During training yesterday, some of us noticed changes in how you use your quirk. You were affecting materials without touching them. They noticed, Izuku thought, of course they did. My classmates are too observant to miss something that significant. Maybe we should talk somewhere more private, he suggested. Minutes later, they were gathered in the common room, the late evening hour ensuring they wouldn't be interrupted. Izuku looked around at the faces of his classmates, Todoroki, Iida, Uraraka, even Bakugo lurking at the edge of the group with his characteristic scowl. They deserve to know the truth, he decided, at least part of it. My quirk has evolved, he said simply. During an advanced training exercise with a pro hero, I pushed my molecular reconstruction beyond its previous limits. The result is that I can now affect materials at a distance. What kind of training exercise? Uraraka asked, her brown eyes filled with concern. Bioreconstruction, medical applications of molecular manipulation. Izuku pulled out one of his notebooks, flipping to diagrams of cellular structures. I've been working with heroes who specialize in scientific applications to develop healing techniques. Healing? Todoroki's mismatched eyes sharpened with interest. You can heal injuries with your quirk. Theoretically, yes, but it's incredibly energy-intensive and requires perfect understanding of biological systems. Izuku closed the notebook. The distance-based applications are a side effect of pushing the bioreconstruction to its limits. Bakugo finally spoke up from his position against the wall. Show us. What? Show us this distance manipulation bullshit, Bakugo growled. If your quirk really evolved, prove it. Izuku hesitated, then nodded. He gestured toward a metal desk lamp across the room. Quantum resonance, material analysis. Without moving from his position on the couch, Izuku extended his consciousness toward the lamp. Through his evolved quirk, he could feel its molecular structure, the aluminum base, the steel joints, the copper wiring, even the tungsten filament in the bulb. Quantum resonance, distance reconstruction. The lamp began to change, its straight lines flowed into elegant curves. The utilitarian design became something artistic, almost sculptural, while maintaining its fundamental function. The transformation was smooth and controlled, happening entirely without physical contact. The room was silent as Izuku's classmates stared at the redesigned lamp. That's impossible, Iida breathed. Quirks don't just evolve like that. The theoretical energy requirements for distance-based molecular manipulation should be prohibitive, Todoroki finished, unless you found a way around the normal limitations. Quantum entanglement, Izuku said quietly. During the bioreconstruction work, I discovered that my quirk can create resonance connections between my consciousness and target materials. Once that connection is established, distance becomes irrelevant. Quantum entanglement, Uraraka's eyes widened. Isn't that like advanced physics stuff? Very advanced, Iida confirmed, his engines revving slightly in excitement. You're essentially describing a quirk that operates at the subatomic level. The implications for both combat and support applications are exactly why I've been keeping it quiet, Izuku interrupted. This level of quirk evolution isn't normal. If the wrong people found out about it. He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all understood the implications. A quirk capable of distance-based molecular manipulation would be incredibly valuable to both heroes and villains. So what's the plan? Todoroki asked. You can't hide this forever. Eventually someone will notice. I'm still learning to control it, Izuku admitted. The quantum resonance responds to emotional state even more than my original quirk did. Strong feelings can trigger uncontrolled effects. As if summoned by his words, his quirk suddenly flared to life. Every metal object in the room began to resonate faintly, responding to the mix of anxiety and excitement flowing through him. Whoa, Uraraka grabbed the arms of her chair as it started to shift slightly. Izuku, you're affecting everything. Sorry, Izuku immediately pulled back his consciousness, severing the resonance connections. The metal objects stopped their subtle transformations, but the demonstration had made his point clearly. You need training, Bakugo said bluntly. Real training, not just theory and notebooks. If you can't control this evolved quirk, you're a danger to everyone around you. He's right, Izuku realized. The Genesis Protocol gave me incredible new abilities, but it also made me potentially dangerous if I lose control. There's something else, he said, pulling out his phone and showing them a text message. All Might wants to see me tomorrow. He's been involved in my recent training. The message was simple. Young Midoriya, please meet me at Training Ground Gamma tomorrow after classes. It's time to test your new capabilities properly. All Might knows about your quirk evolution, Iida asked. He's the one who suggested I work with heroes specializing in advanced applications, Izuku replied, which was technically true. He thinks the distance-based techniques could be incredibly valuable for rescue work. Or incredibly dangerous for combat work, Todoroki observed. A hero who can affect enemy equipment and the environment from a distance. That's a significant tactical advantage. Which is exactly why villains would want to either recruit or eliminate someone with those abilities, Bakugo added grimly. The weight of their concerns settled over Izuku like a blanket. His quirk evolution had opened up incredible possibilities, but it had also made him a much larger target. I need to master these new abilities, he said finally. Not just for my own development, but for everyone's safety, if I can't control quantum resonance properly. Then we'll help you, Uraraka said firmly. That's what classmates do, right? Uraraka's right, Iida agreed. Your quirk may have evolved beyond normal parameters, but you're still our friend and classmate. We'll support your training however we can. Even Todoroki nodded. Your analytical approach has always been impressive. Now you have the power to match your strategic thinking with proper training and support. I could become a real asset to the hero community, Izuku finished, or a real threat if something goes wrong. Then we make sure nothing goes wrong, Bakugo said, pushing off from the wall. Tomorrow, after your meeting with All Might, we're doing some real training. No more secret notebook bullshit, actual combat applications. They're right, Izuku thought as his classmates began discussing training schedules and support strategies. I can't master quantum resonance alone. I need people I trust to help me understand these new limits. The next day, Training Ground Gamma. The industrial training facility was perfect for testing advanced quirk applications, multiple levels of metal platforms, complex machinery, and enough space to safely test techniques that might have unexpected results. All Might was waiting in his civilian form, but Izuku could see the difference immediately. The symbol of peace stood straight and confident, his movements showing none of the careful stiffness that had characterized him before the Genesis Protocol. Young Midoriya, All Might greeted him with a genuine smile. How are you feeling? Any lingering effects from the bioreconstruction work? I'm fine, but my quirk, Izuku gestured toward a nearby metal platform, and it immediately began to resonate in response to his emotional state. The evolution is more dramatic than I expected. Distance-based molecular manipulation, All Might observed, his expression growing serious. Dr. Yori briefed me on the theoretical implications. This puts you in a very exclusive category of heroes. What do you mean? Heroes whose quirks operate beyond normal physical limitations. Your quantum resonance abilities place you alongside heroes like Star and Stripe or even my own mentor. All Might paused. It also makes you a priority target for villains who collect powerful quirks. All for one, Izuku thought with a chill. A villain who steals quirks would definitely be interested in quantum-level molecular manipulation. Which is why we need to accelerate your training, All Might continued. Not just the technical aspects, but combat applications and defensive techniques. He gestured toward the complex training environment around them. Show me what you can do with your new abilities. Don't hold back, I need to understand your current limits. Izuku took a deep breath and extended his consciousness throughout the entire training facility. Through quantum resonance, he could feel every piece of metal, every concrete structure, every mechanical component. It was like having a three-dimensional map of the entire area in his mind. Quantum resonance, environmental dominion. The results were spectacular. Metal platforms began reshaping themselves into complex structures. Concrete walls flowed into new configurations. Even the mechanical training devices began optimizing themselves for maximum efficiency. But more importantly, Izuku was doing it all from a single position, affecting materials hundreds of meters away with the same precision he'd once achieved through direct contact. Remarkable, All Might breathed. You're essentially conducting the entire environment like a symphony, but what about combat applications? Quantum resonance tactical arsenal. Without moving from his position, Izuku began creating weapons and defensive structures throughout the training ground. Metal spears formed in the air, held in place by molecular bonds. Concrete barriers rose to create cover positions. Even the lighting improved as he optimized the electrical systems. The applications for rescue work are obvious, he said, maintaining his concentration while explaining. I could stabilize damaged buildings from a safe distance, create escape routes through debris, even optimize rescue equipment in real time. In for combat, Izuku's expression grew more serious. I could disable enemy equipment without getting close, reconstruct the environment to provide tactical advantages. Even, he hesitated. Go on. Even affect an opponent's costume or support items, assuming they're made of materials I can manipulate. Izuku released his hold on the training environment, everything settling back into its original configuration. But the energy requirements are still enormous for complex applications. All Might nodded thoughtfully. The power level is incredible, but so are the risks, if villains realized what you're capable of. They'd either try to recruit me or eliminate me before I become a threat, Izuku finished. I've been thinking about that. Which brings me to why I really wanted to meet with you today. All Might's expression grew grave. There have been reports of increased villain activity recently. Nothing concrete, but enough to suggest that someone is gathering information about UA students with unusual quirks. Someone is investigating us, Izuku realized. Probably the same organization that attacked the USJ. What do you need me to do? Be prepared. Your quirk evolution makes you incredibly valuable, but also incredibly vulnerable. If villains decide you're too dangerous to leave alone. All Might didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. They both understood the implications. I won't run from a fight, Izuku said quietly. If villains want to target me because of my abilities, then I'll show them why that's a mistake. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. All Might smiled, and for a moment his civilian form seemed to radiate the same confidence as his hero persona. Because I think you're going to get that chance sooner than either of us would prefer. As they left the training ground, Izuku felt his quantum resonance responding to his emotional state, not with anxiety this time, but with determination. His quirk had evolved beyond anything he'd imagined possible, but so had his responsibility to use it wisely. Whatever's coming, he thought, I'll be ready for it. The molecular world around him hummed in agreement, quantum connections forming and dissolving in patterns that seemed almost like a promise. Plus Ultra, time to go beyond the limits of what anyone thinks is possible. The abandoned warehouse district of Kamino had always been a place where heroes feared to tread alone. Industrial buildings stood like concrete tombstones, their broken windows reflecting the gray morning sky as Izuku made his way through the maze of forgotten structures. This isn't a coincidence, he thought, his analytical mind cataloging every detail of his surroundings. The anonymous tip about villain activity, the specific location, even the timing, someone wanted me here. His quantum resonance was already active, extending his consciousness through the metal and concrete around him. The molecular signatures told a story of recent occupancy, fresh scratches on metal surfaces, concrete dust that had been disturbed within the last few hours, and something else. Decay patterns, he realized with a chill. Someone with a disintegration quirk has been here recently. Impressive deduction. The voice came from above, echoing through the empty warehouse as a figure emerged from the shadows of the upper catwalks. Izuku immediately recognized the distinctive hands and pale complexion, even though this wasn't the same unstable villain from the USJ attack. Jisakikai overhaul. You're not Shigaraki, Izuku said, his hands already beginning to glow with molecular energy. How observant! Overhaul descended to the warehouse floor with fluid grace, his white coat pristine despite the industrial setting. I am someone far more interested in the scientific applications of quirks, particularly yours. The Yakuza leader's golden eyes studied Izuku with the intensity of a researcher examining a fascinating specimen. Molecular reconstruction with quantum-level applications, distance-based matter manipulation, even biological reconstruction capabilities. You've become quite the prodigy. He knows too much, Izuku thought. This isn't random villain activity, this is targeted recruitment or elimination. What do you want? Izuku asked, his quantum resonance mapping every possible escape route and improvised weapon in the warehouse. To offer you something your heroes never could. Overhaul spread his arms, gesturing to the industrial space around them. True understanding of your quirk's potential. Proper guidance from someone who shares your analytical approach to power. With a casual touch of his gloved hand against a concrete pillar, Overhaul demonstrated his own abilities. The structural support dissolved and reformed into an elaborate throne, the molecular reconstruction happening with practiced ease. You see, Overhaul settled into his newly created seat. We both understand that quirks are not gifts from nature. They are tools to be studied, refined, and optimized through scientific application. His reconstruction is incredibly precise, Izuku noted, analyzing the molecular patterns in the reformed concrete. But it's purely destructive and reconstructive. He doesn't have the resonance connection that allows for true optimization. Your point being, Izuku asked. My point being that you're wasting your potential at that academy. Overhaul's voice carried the tone of a disappointed professor. Playing hero, following rules, limiting yourself to ethical applications of power that could reshape the world. The Yakuza leader stood and approached a collection of metal debris, his quirk flowing through it like liquid destruction and creation. Within moments, he'd created an intricate mechanical device, some kind of restraint system with molecular-level precision. Tell me, young Midoriya, what have your heroes taught you about the true potential of molecular manipulation? That it should be used to help people, Izuku replied, but his analytical mind was already nodding the sophistication of Overhaul's construction. That device isn't just a restraint, it's designed to suppress quirk usage through direct molecular interference. Help people? Overhaul laughed, the sound echoing unpleasantly through the warehouse. Your quirk could rewrite the fundamental structure of human biology. You could eliminate genetic diseases, optimize physical capabilities, even extend human lifespan indefinitely, and they have you making weapons from scrap metal. He's not wrong about the potential, Izuku admitted to himself. Bioreconstruction could theoretically accomplish all of those things, but the implications. You're talking about human experimentation, Izuku said, about changing people without their consent. I'm talking about evolution. Overhaul's calm demeanor cracked slightly, revealing the fanatic underneath. Humanity is plagued by quirks, random, uncontrolled abilities that create chaos and suffering, but with proper molecular reconstruction, we could create a perfect society. No more villain quirks, no more genetic disabilities, no more random chance determining human potential. The Yakuza leader touched another section of the warehouse, and the entire structure began to shift around them. Walls flowed into new configurations, creating a complex maze designed to limit movement and escape options. Join me, Overhaul said, extending a gloved hand toward Izuku. Let me show you applications of molecular reconstruction that your heroes would never dream of. Together, we could create a world where quirks serve humanity, rather than dividing it. This is what I was afraid of, Izuku realized. Someone with similar abilities but completely different ethics. He sees molecular reconstruction as a tool for control and perfection, not healing and protection. And if I refuse? Overhaul's expression hardened. Then you become a threat that must be eliminated. A molecular reconstruction user with quantum-level capabilities could potentially reverse everything I've worked to achieve. The warehouse around them continued to shift and change, Overhaul's quirk transforming the industrial space into an elaborate trap. But Izuku's quantum resonance was already providing him with tactical options. He's powerful, but he's thinking like a scientist, not a fighter, Izuku analyzed. His reconstructions are precise but predictable, and he's limiting himself to direct contact applications. Quantum resonance, environmental analysis. Izuku's consciousness exploded outward, mapping every molecular structure in the transformed warehouse. But instead of trying to counter Overhaul's changes directly, he began working with them. Molecular forge, sympathetic optimization. The maze walls that Overhaul had created began to improve under Izuku's influence. Structural weak points were reinforced. Hidden passages were created in places where the Yakuza leader couldn't see them. Even the lighting was optimized to give Izuku tactical advantages. Clever, Overhaul admitted, his golden eyes tracking the subtle changes in his construction. You're not fighting my reconstruction, you're improving it, but improvement works both ways. The Yakuza leader pressed both hands against the floor, and the entire warehouse floor began to surge upward in a wave of concrete and steel. But this wasn't random destruction. It was a coordinated attack designed to force Izuku into a specific position. He's herding me toward that restraint device, Izuku realized. This entire conversation was just a distraction while he set up the capture. Atmospheric arsenal, emergency countermeasures. For the first time since his quirk evolution, Izuku attempted large-scale atmospheric reconstruction under combat conditions. The air around him solidified into a protective shell just as Overhaul's concrete wave reached him. But the Yakuza leader was already adapting. His quirk flowed through the atmospheric construct, beginning to break down the molecular bonds that held it together. Atmospheric gases are still just molecules, Overhaul said with satisfaction, and molecules can always be deconstructed. He's right, Izuku thought as his protective barrier began to dissolve, but he's also making a fundamental mistake about how my quirk actually works. Genesis Protocol, quantum entanglement. Instead of trying to maintain his atmospheric constructs through raw power, Izuku established quantum resonance connections with every molecule in the warehouse. Not just the obvious materials like metal and concrete, but everything, the air, the dust, even the moisture in the atmosphere. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Every surface, every particle, every molecular structure in the entire building became an extension of Izuku's consciousness. Molecular storm, total environmental dominion. The warehouse exploded into motion as Izuku's quantum-enhanced quirk took control of literally everything around them. Walls flowed into new shapes. The floor became liquid beneath Overhaul's feet. Even the air itself began to move in coordinated patterns that created powerful wind currents. But most importantly, Izuku was doing it all without direct contact, his quantum resonance allowing him to affect materials throughout the entire space simultaneously. Impossible, Overhaul breathed, struggling to maintain his balance as the environment shifted around him. Molecular reconstruction doesn't work at this scale. You're thinking too small, Izuku replied, his voice carrying a confidence he'd never felt before. You see molecular reconstruction as a tool for control, but it's actually about understanding and cooperation. To demonstrate, he gestured toward the restraint device Overhaul had created. Instead of destroying it, Izuku's quirk began optimizing its molecular structure, transforming it from a suppression device into something completely different. Molecular Forge, Adaptive Medical Scanner. The restraint device flowed and changed, becoming a sophisticated medical analysis system that could monitor biological functions without causing harm. You wanted to show me advanced applications? Izuku continued. Here's one you never considered, using molecular reconstruction to enhance existing technology instead of replacing it with your vision of perfection. Overhaul's calm facade finally cracked completely. His hands slammed against the shifting floor, his quirk pouring out in waves of destruction and reconstruction. But Izuku's quantum-enhanced abilities were operating on a fundamentally different level. Sympathetic reconstruction, harmonic integration. Instead of fighting Overhaul's attempts to control the environment, Izuku began working with them. Every change the Yakuza leader made was immediately optimized, improved, and integrated into a larger pattern that Izuku was conducting like a molecular symphony. This is what I learned from healing All Might, Izuku realized. Molecular reconstruction isn't about imposing your will, it's about understanding what wants to happen and helping it achieve its optimal state. The result was spectacular. The warehouse became a fluid, living space that responded to both their quirks but followed Izuku's quantum resonance guidance. Overhaul found himself trapped not by walls or barriers, but by an environment that simply wouldn't cooperate with his destructive impulses. "You're not just using molecular reconstruction," Overhaul said, his voice filled with something that might have been respect. "You're conducting molecular symphony. This level of coordination shouldn't be possible." "It's possible when you stop trying to control everything and start trying to understand it," Izuku replied. "That's the difference between us. You see molecular reconstruction as a way to impose your vision of perfection. I see it as a way to help things become their best possible versions." For a moment, the warehouse was still as both quirk users maintained their molecular influence in perfect balance. Then Overhaul's expression shifted, and Izuku saw something unexpected in the Yakuza leader's golden eyes, genuine curiosity. "Teach me," Overhaul said suddenly. "What?" "This quantum resonance technique, this harmonic integration, the applications for my research." Overhaul's scientific mind was clearly racing. "I could optimize the human genome more efficiently. I could create beneficial mutations instead of just eliminating problematic ones." He's still thinking about human experimentation, Izuku realized, but now he's thinking about it from a perspective of cooperation rather than control. "I can't teach you to use my quirk," Izuku said carefully, "but I could share the theoretical frameworks, the scientific approach to molecular resonance." It was a dangerous offer, but also potentially game-changing, if he could redirect Overhaul's fanatical drive toward constructive applications. "A partnership," Overhaul mused, "not recruitment but collaboration between equals. You provide the theoretical framework, I provide advanced laboratory facilities and research subjects." "Volunteers," Izuku corrected firmly. "Any research would have to use willing volunteers who fully understand the risks." "Volunteers," Overhaul agreed, though his tone suggested he was still processing the concept. "And the research would focus on beneficial applications, healing genetic diseases, optimizing biological function, extending healthy lifespan." "Can I trust him?" Izuku wondered. He's still a Yakuza leader with a history of human experimentation, but he's also one of the few people in the world who truly understands advanced molecular manipulation. "One condition," Izuku said finally, "any research we do together gets shared with the heroic medicine community. No exclusive applications, no proprietary techniques that could be used to harm people." Overhaul considered this for a long moment, his analytical mind clearly weighing the implications. "Acceptable, though I reserve the right to publish papers on our theoretical discoveries." A reformed Yakuza leader who wants to become a legitimate researcher, Izuku thought. It's either the best possible outcome or the most elaborate trap I've ever walked into. "There's one more thing," Overhaul added. "If we're going to work together, you need to understand the full scope of what molecular reconstruction can achieve. I have facilities, research data, and practical applications that your heroes have never dreamed of." The warehouse began to shift around them again, but this time it was clearly intentional. Overhaul was creating a doorway to somewhere else. "Where does that lead?" Izuku asked. "To my laboratory, to research that could revolutionize not just heroic medicine but human biology itself." Overhaul's golden eyes gleamed with scientific enthusiasm. "Are you prepared to see what molecular reconstruction can really accomplish?" This is either the beginning of an incredible partnership, Izuku thought, or the biggest mistake I've ever made. But his quantum resonance was telling him something interesting about Overhaul's molecular signature. There was no deception in his current emotional state, only genuine scientific curiosity and the desire for collaboration. Plus ultra, Izuku decided. Sometimes going beyond your limits means taking risks that could change everything. "Lead the way," he said. As they walked through Overhaul's molecular doorway toward whatever lay beyond, Izuku felt his quirk resonating with anticipation. The mentor he'd found wasn't the one he'd expected, but it might be exactly the one he needed. The underground laboratory beneath Overhaul's compound was a marvel of scientific engineering that made even Dr. Yor's facilities look primitive by comparison. Gleaming equipment lined the walls, molecular analyzers that could map atomic structures in real time, bioreconstruction chambers that could theoretically rebuild entire organ systems, and computers running simulations that pushed the boundaries of known science. This is what unlimited funding and moral flexibility can accomplish, Izuku thought as Overhaul led him through the facility, but also what happens when scientific curiosity isn't tempered by ethical constraints. Impressive, isn't it? Overhaul gestured toward a massive cylindrical device that hummed with barely contained energy. This is my pride and joy, a molecular reconstruction amplifier that can boost quirk effects by orders of magnitude. Amplifier? Izuku approached the device cautiously, his quantum resonance immediately analyzing its construction. How does it work? Resonance multiplication. The device creates harmonic frequencies that match and amplify the user's natural molecular manipulation patterns. Overhaul's eyes gleamed with scientific pride. With this equipment, even minor reconstruction quirks become capable of large-scale applications. The implications are staggering, Izuku realized, if this technology fell into the wrong hands. You're worried about villains gaining access to this technology, Overhaul observed, reading his expression accurately. A reasonable concern, which is why I've kept my research private until now. Until I found someone who might be worthy of true collaboration. Overhaul activated a holographic display showing complex molecular diagrams. Tell me, what do you know about quirk singularity theory? Izuku's analytical mind immediately grasped the implications. The theoretical point where quirks become so powerful that they fundamentally alter human society. Most researchers consider it hypothetical. Most researchers lack the tools to test their hypotheses. Overhaul manipulated the hologram, showing projections of exponentially increasing quirk power across generations. But with molecular reconstruction at the quantum level, we could potentially guide quirk evolution instead of leaving it to random chance. The laboratory suddenly felt much smaller as the weight of what Overhaul was suggesting sank in. You're talking about artificially inducing quirk singularity. I'm talking about controlled evolution. Imagine a world where every quirk is optimized for beneficial applications, where genetic diseases are extinct, where human potential is limited only by our understanding of molecular biology. It's seductive, Izuku admitted to himself. The scientific possibilities are incredible, but the risks. Before he could voice his concerns, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red lights flashed as automated systems activated emergency protocols. What's happening? Izuku asked. Overhaul's expression darkened as he checked a security monitor. We have visitors, unwelcome ones. The screen showed figures moving through the upper levels of the compound, villains, but not the typical criminals that usually targeted Yakuza operations. These were organized, coordinated, and led by someone whose presence made Izuku's blood run cold. All for one. Even through the security camera, the symbol of evil's overwhelming presence was unmistakable. He moved with casual confidence, his suit immaculate despite the destruction his subordinates were causing around him. He's here for you, Overhaul said grimly. Your quantum resonance abilities have attracted attention from someone who collects powerful quirks. This is what All Might warned me about, Izuku thought, his mind already shifting into tactical analysis mode. All for One wants to steal my quirk and add it to his collection. Can we escape? He asked. Unlikely, he's probably surrounded the entire compound. Overhaul began activating additional security systems, but his expression suggested he didn't expect them to hold for long. But we do have one advantage. Which is? You're not facing him alone. Overhaul's hands began to glow with molecular energy, and this laboratory is the perfect environment for advanced reconstruction techniques. The facility shuddered as explosions echoed from above. All for One's subordinates were making short work of the compound's conventional defenses, but the underground laboratory was built to withstand much more significant threats. How long until they reach us? Izuku asked. Minutes, maybe less. Overhaul was already beginning to reshape the laboratory's layout, creating defensive positions and tactical advantages through molecular reconstruction. But that might be enough time to show you something that could change the balance of power entirely. He led Izuku to the central console, where a massive molecular diagram rotated slowly in holographic display. I've been working on this for years, a theoretical framework for quirk multiplication through resonance amplification. Quirk multiplication. Not stealing or copying quirks like All for One, but temporarily amplifying existing abilities beyond their normal limits. Overhaul's fingers danced across the controls, highlighting specific sections of the diagram. Your quantum resonance makes you the perfect test subject. He wants to experiment on me right now while we're under attack, but as Izuku studied the molecular framework, his analytical mind began to see the potential. This could theoretically boost my quirk to planetary scale applications, he said slowly. For a limited time, yes, the energy requirements would be enormous and the strain on your biological systems. Overhaul paused. It might kill you, but it would also make you temporarily more powerful than any quirk user in history. The explosions were getting closer. Through his quantum resonance, Izuku could feel the molecular disruption as All for One's forces tore through the compound's structure. I have maybe 2 minutes to decide, he realized. Try Overhaul's experimental amplification and risk death from the strain, or face All for One with my current abilities and definitely lose. What would I need to do? Step into the amplification chamber and allow my quirk to interface with yours. Overhaul gestured toward the cylindrical device. I'll use molecular reconstruction to optimize your biological systems for the increased power load, while the amplifier boosts your quantum resonance to theoretical maximum output. It's insane, Izuku thought, but it might be the only way to protect everyone. All for One would hurt if he steals my quirk. There's something you should know, he said as he approached the amplification chamber. My quirk evolution happened during a bioreconstruction procedure. If you're going to interface with my molecular patterns, you might experience some unexpected effects. What kind of effects? The quantum resonance tends to create permanent connections between users. You might gain some level of distance-based manipulation. Izuku paused, or the interface might kill us both. Overhaul's analytical mind was clearly racing through the possibilities. Acceptable risk. The alternative is losing everything to All for One. The laboratory's main door exploded inward as All for One's subordinates breached the final defensive layer. But instead of immediate attack, they formed a protective perimeter as their leader descended into the facility. All for One moved with the casual confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem he couldn't solve through overwhelming power. His suit was pristine, his presence radiating menace that made the very air feel heavier. Chisaki Kai, the symbol of evil, said pleasantly, and young Midoriya, how convenient to find you both in the same location. He's been planning this, Izuku realized. The timing isn't coincidental, he knew we would be here together. I've come to collect something that belongs in my collection, All for One continued. A quirk with quantum-level molecular manipulation capabilities. Such power shouldn't be wasted on someone so young. Over my dead body, Overhaul snarled, his hands already beginning to glow with molecular energy. That can be arranged, All for One replied with amusement, but it's hardly necessary. The boy will come willingly once he understands the alternative. Shadows began moving around the laboratory as All for One activated multiple stolen quirks simultaneously. Tendrils of darkness reached toward them while the very air began to shimmer with destructive energy. Now or never, Izuku decided. Do it, he told Overhaul, stepping into the amplification chamber. The Yakuza leader didn't hesitate. His quirk flowed through the chamber's systems, interfacing with Izuku's molecular patterns while the amplification device hummed to life. The sensation was unlike anything Izuku had ever experienced. His quantum resonance exploded outward, expanding from the laboratory to the compound, then beyond. His consciousness touched every molecule in a radius that kept growing, a kilometer, 10 kilometers, 50 kilometers. This is what planetary-scale molecular manipulation feels like, he thought in awe. I can feel everything. Every building, every person, every living thing for hundreds of kilometers. But the strain was enormous. He could feel his biological systems pushing beyond safe limits, his energy reserves draining at an alarming rate. Quantum resonance, maximum output, he called out, his voice echoing with power that made the laboratory's equipment resonate sympathetically. All for One's shadows struck the amplification chamber and simply dissolved. His destructive energy attacks were neutralized before they could reach their targets. Even the symbol of evil himself took a step backward as he recognized the level of power now radiating from Izuku. Impressive, All for One admitted, but ultimately futile. I have faced quirks at this power level before. He's not wrong, Izuku realized. Raw power isn't enough against someone with his experience and collection of abilities. But then Overhaul's interface with his quirk created an unexpected effect. The Yakuza leader's molecular reconstruction abilities suddenly gained quantum resonance characteristics, while Izuku found himself with access to Overhaul's advanced analytical frameworks. Sympathetic reconstruction, dual user protocol. Working together through their quirk interface, they began reshaping not just the laboratory, but the entire underground complex. Walls flowed into optimal defensive configurations. The molecular amplifier's output increased exponentially. Even the air itself became a weapon under their combined control. Genesis Protocol, Environmental Absolute. The underground facility became an extension of their combined consciousness. Every surface, every molecule, every atom responded to their unified will. All for One found himself fighting not just two quirk users, but an entire environment that had become their ally. This is what true collaboration looks like, Izuku thought as their combined abilities reached levels neither could achieve alone. Not just working together, but actually sharing consciousness through quantum molecular resonance. All for One's expression grew serious for the first time. Quirk evolution through collaboration, fascinating, but still insufficient. The symbol of evil revealed why he had never seemed truly threatened. He had been analyzing their combined abilities, preparing to steal not just Izuku's quirk, but the evolved version created through their collaboration. He wants the dual-user quantum resonance, Izuku realized, not just molecular reconstruction, but the ability to share quirk consciousness with others. All for One acquisition protocol, the villain declared. Dark tendrils of pure quirk-stealing energy reached toward them, but something unexpected happened. The quantum resonance interface between Izuku and Overhaul created a feedback loop that the stealing quirk couldn't process. Our quirks are quantum entangled, Izuku understood. He can't steal one without taking both, and our combined consciousness is resisting the acquisition. Molecular storm quantum rejection. Instead of defending against All for One's stealing attempt, they turned it into an attack. The feedback loop from their entangled quirks sent destructive resonance back through the villain's stealing ability. For the first time in decades, All for One's quirk acquisition failed catastrophically. The backlash sent him staggering backward, his perfect composure finally cracking. Impossible, he breathed. Quirks cannot resist acquisition through quantum entanglement. They can when the users understand the fundamental science, Overhaul said grimly. Molecular reconstruction at the quantum level creates connections that exist outside normal quirk parameters. But we can't maintain this forever, Izuku thought as he felt the amplifier's strain on his biological systems. The power level is killing me slowly. All for One seemed to reach the same conclusion. Instead of attempting another stealing attack, he began channeling multiple destructive quirks simultaneously, not at them, but at the laboratory's supporting structure. If I cannot have your quirk, he said coldly, then no one will. The entire underground complex began to collapse as All for One's combined attacks overwhelmed even their quantum-enhanced defenses. Tons of concrete and steel crashed down around them as the facility imploded. Genesis Protocol, Emergency Preservation. Working together, Izuku and Overhaul created a protective shell around themselves using every available material in the collapsing laboratory. but they both knew it was only a temporary measure. We need to get out of here, Izuku thought, but the amplifier is the only thing giving us enough power to resist all for one. As if reading his thoughts, Overhaul made a decision that would change everything. Molecular Forge Portable Amplification. Using the last of his individual quirk strength, Overhaul began reconstructing the amplification device into something smaller, more personal. Within seconds, he had created twin devices, sophisticated pieces of technology that could maintain their quantum entanglement even without the massive laboratory equipment. "Take this," he said, pressing one of the devices into Izuku's hands. "Our quirks are permanently linked now, distance won't matter." Permanent quantum entanglement, Izuku realized. We're connected at the molecular level for life. The laboratory finally collapsed completely, but their protective shell held long enough for them to escape through Overhaul's molecular transportation. When they emerged on the surface, All for One was gone, but they both knew he would return. "This isn't over," Izuku said, looking at the portable amplifier in his hands. "No," Overhaul agreed, "but we've proven something important today. Collaborative quantum resonance is possible, and it's more powerful than anything All for One has ever encountered." As they stood in the ruins of the compound, Izuku felt his quirk settling into its new configuration. The amplification had changed him permanently, but so had the collaboration with Overhaul. "I'm not the same person who walked into that warehouse," he thought. "My quirk has evolved again, but this time through partnership rather than crisis." In the distance, sirens wailed as heroes responded to the destruction, but Izuku knew that the real battle was just beginning. All for One had seen their capabilities, and he would adapt. Whatever comes next, Izuku thought, feeling the quantum resonance connection with Overhaul humming in the background of his consciousness, we'll face it together. The abandoned city of Kamino had become a battlefield unlike any in recorded history. 3 months after the laboratory incident, All for One had finally made his move, not just against Izuku, but against Hero Society itself. The symbol of evil stood at the center of the devastated district, his presence warping the very air around him as he commanded an army of artificially enhanced nomas. He's not here for random destruction, Izuku thought as he surveyed the chaos from his position atop a partially collapsed building. This is targeted. He wants to draw me out while demonstrating his power to the world. Through his quantum resonance, Izuku could feel every molecule in the destroyed city, the concrete rubble, the twisted metal, even the lingering traces of fear in the air. But more importantly, he could feel the portable amplifier's connection to Overhaul, who was coordinating evacuation efforts from the perimeter. "Our quantum entanglement has grown stronger over the past 3 months," he noted. "We can share consciousness across any distance now." Young Midoriya, All Might's voice crackled through his communicator. "Are you in position?" "Ready when you are," Izuku replied, checking the advanced support equipment that Hatsum had designed specifically for this confrontation. The gear incorporated molecular stabilizers, energy distribution systems, and even emergency medical protocols developed from his bioreconstruction research. "The plan is sound," he reminded himself. "All Might creates the opening, I use Genesis protocol to neutralize All for One's stolen quirks, and Overhaul provides quantum amplification from a safe distance." But as he prepared to move, his analytical mind caught something that made him recalculate everything. All for One isn't using his full power, he realized. He's holding back, testing our responses. This entire battle is an elaborate data-gathering exercise. The symbol of evil stood calmly amid the destruction, his suit pristine despite the chaos around him. When he spoke, his voice carried across the entire battlefield with unnatural clarity. "Heroes of Japan," All for One announced, "today you will witness the futility of your symbol of peace. Today you will understand that power, not idealism, determines the fate of nations." All Might descended from the sky like a meteor, his landing creating a crater that sent shockwaves through the ruined district. But even in his fully restored state, the symbol of peace looked small compared to the overwhelming presence of his nemesis. "All for One," All Might's voice boomed across the battlefield. "Your reign of terror ends today." "Does it?" All for One's laughter was genuinely amused. "Tell me, symbol of peace, how does it feel to know that your miraculous recovery came at the cost of creating an even greater threat?" He knows about the Genesis Protocol, Izuku realized with a chill. He's been watching, studying, preparing for this exact moment. The battle erupted with explosive violence as All Might launched himself at his nemesis. But All for One was ready, his stolen quirks creating barriers, redirecting attacks, and countering every move with practiced ease. Now Izuku thought, activating his portable amplifier. Quantum resonance, maximum integration. His consciousness exploded outward, connecting with Overhaul's amplified abilities and creating a quantum network that encompassed the entire battlefield. Through their shared awareness, they began implementing the most ambitious molecular reconstruction ever attempted. Genesis Protocol, Environmental Absolute Dominion. The ruined city began to respond to their combined will. Concrete flowed into tactical barriers that protected fleeing civilians. Metal debris reshaped itself into weapons and supports. Even the air began moving in coordinated patterns that disrupted All for One's area effect quirks. But the symbol of evil simply smiled. Impressive as always, young Midoriya, but did you truly think I wouldn't prepare for your quantum resonance abilities? All for One activated a quirk that Izuku had never seen before, something that sent waves of disruptive energy through the molecular connections he'd established with the environment. Quantum interference, Izuku recognized with growing alarm. He has a quirk specifically designed to counter quantum resonance. The environmental control began to slip as All for One's interference disrupted the molecular bonds Izuku was maintaining. Worse, the disruption was feeding back through his connection with Overhaul, threatening to damage both their quirks permanently. You see, All for One continued his casual conversation while simultaneously battling All Might and disrupting Izuku's abilities. I have spent months analyzing your collaboration with the Yakuza leader. Every technique, every theoretical framework, every possible application, all of it studied and countered. This was a trap from the beginning, Izuku realized, not just to steal my quirk, but to neutralize both me and Overhaul simultaneously. But as the quantum interference intensified, something unexpected happened. Instead of weakening their connection, the disruptive energy began creating new resonance patterns between their entangled quirks. The interference is acting like a catalyst, Izuku understood with sudden clarity. It's not just disrupting our abilities, it's forcing them to evolve. Through their quantum link, he felt Overhaul reaching the same conclusion. Their combined consciousness began adapting to the interference, using it as a source of additional energy rather than fighting against it. Sympathetic reconstruction, harmonic evolution. Their quirks didn't just resist All for One's interference, they began feeding on it, growing stronger with each disruptive wave. The molecular connections that had been severed reformed at a deeper level, creating quantum bonds that existed outside normal quirk parameters entirely. Impossible, All for One breathed, his composure finally cracking as he realized what was happening. Quirks cannot evolve in real time through environmental pressure. They can when the users understand the fundamental science, Izuku replied, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated through every molecule in the area. Molecular reconstruction isn't just about changing matter, it's about understanding the connections between all things. The battlefield transformed as their evolved abilities reached full potential. Every piece of debris, every damaged building, every molecule of air became part of a vast network under their control. But more importantly, they were doing it through cooperation rather than domination. This is what molecular reconstruction was always meant to be, Izuku realized, not controlling matter but partnering with it. All for One launched every destructive quirk in his arsenal simultaneously, his attacks turning the air itself into a weapon. But Izuku and Overhaul's quantum network simply absorbed the energy, redistributing it harmlessly through their molecular connections. Genesis Protocol, Ultimate Configuration. Working together across their quantum link, they began the most complex reconstruction ever attempted, not just changing the environment, but optimizing it for peace. The destroyed city began rebuilding itself, but not as it had been before. Streets became safer, buildings became stronger, even the air quality improved as their quirks worked at the molecular level to create an objectively better place for people to live. You're not fighting, All for One observed with growing anger. You're improving everything around you. How disgustingly heroic. Because that's what heroes do, All Might said, his voice carrying new confidence as he recognized what Izuku was accomplishing. They don't just fight evil, they build something better. The symbol of peace's next attack was powered by his restored health, the full strength that Izuku's Genesis protocol had returned to him. But instead of merely striking all for one, the attack was coordinated with the quantum reconstruction happening around them. All Might understands, Izuku realized. He's not just fighting, he's working with our molecular network. Sympathetic reconstruction, heroic integration. Izuku reached out through his quantum resonance not to control All Might's movements, but to optimize them. The symbol of peace's attacks became more precise, more effective, supported by environmental changes that created perfect tactical opportunities. All for One found himself fighting not just one opponent, but an entire reality that was actively working against his destructive goals. Every stolen quirk he activated was immediately countered by environmental changes. Every attack was redirected or absorbed by the molecular network surrounding him. This ends now, All for One snarled, abandoning all pretense of control. All for One, total acquisition. The symbol of evil activated his stealing quirk at maximum power, reaching out to claim not just Izuku's abilities, but every quirk in the vicinity. The energy was so intense that it began tearing at the fabric of reality itself. But Izuku was ready. Quantum resonance, absolute rejection. Instead of defending against the stealing attempt, he opened his quantum network completely, not just to overhaul, but to every hero in the area. All Might's strength, Endeavor's flames, even the quirks of students who had come to help, all of it became part of a vast cooperative network that operated through mutual consent rather than theft. The feedback was immediate and catastrophic for All for One. His stealing quirk, designed to claim individual abilities, couldn't process the quantum-entangled network of willing cooperation. The backlash sent destructive energy through every stolen quirk he possessed. My quirks, All for One staggered as his collection began to destabilize. What have you done? Shown you the difference between taking power and earning it, Izuku replied, his consciousness still linked to dozens of heroes through quantum resonance. You steal abilities, we share them willingly. The symbol of evil's stolen quirks began burning out one by one, unable to maintain stability in the face of the quantum network's cooperative energy. Within minutes, the man who had terrorized Japan for generations was reduced to just his original quirk, and even that was destabilizing. This isn't possible, All for One gasped. Power cannot be shared like this. Quirks are individual abilities, not collective resources. You're thinking too small, Overhaul's voice carried across the battlefield through their quantum link. Molecular reconstruction shows us that everything is connected. Individual quirks are just expressions of larger patterns. All Might stepped forward, his presence no longer just that of an individual hero, but of the entire network's combined will. All for One, your time is over. The final blow wasn't just All Might's fist, it was the combined intention of every hero in the quantum network, channeled through molecular reconstruction and focused into a single moment of absolute justice. All for One fell, his stolen quirks finally abandoning him entirely. The symbol of evil was revealed as what he had always been underneath the stolen power, an old man whose ambitions had consumed everything that made him human. As the battle ended and the quantum network gradually dissolved back into individual consciousness, Izuku felt a profound sense of completion. They hadn't just defeated All for One, they had proven that cooperation was more powerful than domination. Young Midoriya, All Might said, his voice filled with pride. You've shown us the future of heroic society. Not just the future, Izuku thought as he looked around at the rebuilding city, its molecular structure optimized by their combined efforts. The present. This is what the world can become when people work together instead of fighting for individual power. Overhaul appeared through a molecular transportation portal, his normally composed expression showing genuine emotion. The quantum entanglement is stabilizing into something permanent, he reported. We've created a new form of quirk evolution, one based on voluntary cooperation. What does that mean? Izuku asked. It means that any willing quirk user can potentially join the quantum resonance network. Not permanently, but temporarily when major threats require coordinated responses. Overhaul's scientific mind was clearly racing with possibilities. We've essentially created a method for heroes to share abilities without losing their individual quirks. The implications were staggering. Hero society could become truly cooperative, with abilities shared freely among those who earned the trust and respect of their colleagues. This is what Plus Ultra really means, Izuku realized. Not just going beyond individual limits, but going beyond the idea that power has to be individual. As emergency responders and fellow heroes began arriving to help with the aftermath, Izuku pulled out his notebook. The same one he'd been carrying since middle school, now filled with months of molecular theory and quantum resonance equations. On a fresh page, he wrote, "Quantum resonance, cooperative network protocol, complete success. Today we proved that the greatest power isn't what one person can accomplish alone, but what people can achieve when they truly work together. Molecular reconstruction isn't just about changing matter, it's about building connections." All for One represented the old way of thinking about power, taking what belongs to others, hoarding abilities, using strength to dominate. But we've shown that there's a better way, sharing willingly, supporting each other, using our abilities to build rather than destroy. The symbol of evil is defeated, but more importantly, we've created a new symbol of peace. Not one person carrying the burden alone, but a network of heroes supporting each other and the world they protect. He closed the notebook and looked around at the heroes working together to help civilians and rebuild the damaged areas. Through his quantum resonance, he could still feel the lingering connections, not the overwhelming network of the battle, but gentle bonds of trust and cooperation. This is just the beginning, he thought. We've changed not just how we fight villains, but how we think about heroism itself. All Might approached his expression mixing exhaustion with deep satisfaction. "How do you feel about your first major victory?" "Like it wasn't just mine," Izuku replied honestly. "Like it belonged to everyone who chose to trust the quantum network." "Exactly as it should be," All Might smiled, and for the first time since Izuku had known him, the symbol of peace looked truly at peace. The world is in good hands. As the sun set over Kamino, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Izuku felt his quirk humming quietly in the background of his consciousness. The molecular world around him was no longer just something to analyze and manipulate. It was a living network of connections, possibilities, and hope. Plus Ultra, he thought one final time, we've gone beyond the limits of what anyone thought was possible, and this is only the beginning. The age of the symbol of evil was over. The age of truly cooperative heroism had begun. The end. And there you have it, Izuku's incredible journey from the weak molecular reconstruction kid to literally the hero who defeated All for One and revolutionized hero society forever. From healing All Might to creating quantum networks that let heroes work together in ways never seen before, this Deku didn't just become the greatest hero, he changed what heroism itself means. What was your favorite moment? Was it when he first showed Bakugo his true power at the beach, the insane sports festival performance, or maybe that absolutely mind-blowing final battle where he created a hero network to take down the symbol of evil? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know what other what-if scenarios you want to see. I'm always looking for the next broken concept to explore. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.